had been driving for 14 hours when the desert started to swallow the horizon. Out there in West Texas, between Marathon and Fort Stockton, the night stretches wider than it does anywhere else in the country. The air smells like dust and diesel, and the road feels like it might never end. I was hauling a refrigerated load for a company out of San Angelo, on my way to Tucson. I'd done this route more times than I could count, and I knew every landmark, every rise in the asphalt, every mile marker. But that night something felt different. The highway felt empty in a way that went beyond traffic. It was as if the land itself had gone silent. No radio stations, no coyotes in the distance, not even the wind brushing the sage. Just the hum of the engine and the endless dark. It started around mile marker 71. I caught the faint glow of a single red taillight far ahead, flickering like it had a loose wire. Normally I wouldn't have thought twice, but this light didn't behave like it should have. It wasn't steady. It blinked twice, went out for a few seconds, came back dimmer, then bright again. It almost looked like it was signaling. I adjusted my headlights, thinking maybe I was imagining it. But no, the light was real, maybe a quarter mile ahead, leading me straight down the two-lane highway. I kept a steady pace, curious but cautious. Out here, people break down all the time. It could have been a stranded car, maybe someone waving me down. As I got closer, I realized I couldn't see the outline of any vehicle. Just that single light hovering low about where a taillight might be. The desert was flat and open, so there should have been some reflection, some glint of metal, but there wasn't. I flipped on my high beams. The light didn't change. It stayed dead ahead, about 200 yards in front of me, never getting closer or farther no matter how much I adjusted my speed. I slowed to 45. It slowed too. I sped up to 60. The light drifted faster, like it was reading my mind. Around mile marker 78, I decided I'd had enough. I tapped the CB, thinking maybe another driver would confirm what I was seeing. Any drivers westbound I-10 near Marathon? Static. I tried again, nothing, not a soul on the channel. That's when I realized I hadn't passed another vehicle in nearly an hour. I could feel the isolation pressing in. My truck lights cast long shadows over the scrub, and the darkness between them felt thick like tar. The light ahead began to pulse faster in irregular bursts, almost like a heartbeat. I remember tightening my grip on the wheel, feeling sweat gather under my palms even though the AC was blasting cold. By mile marker 81, I was completely unnerved. The road curved slightly, climbing a small hill, and I figured maybe when I crested it I'd finally see the vehicle. But when I reached the top, the light flickered twice and went out completely. I slowed to a crawl, scanning the road. Nothing. No car, no debris, not even dust kicked up by tires. I coasted forward another 100 feet, headlights sweeping across the asphalt. That's when I saw them, tire marks, fresh ones. They ran straight down the center of my lane, long and dark like someone had braked hard. Then 10 feet later, they just stopped. No swerve, no skid off the shoulder. They ended clean, as if the vehicle had simply lifted off the road and vanished into the air. I parked on the shoulder, left the engine idling, and climbed out. The desert air was cold and dry. I walked to where the marks ended, crouched down, and touched the asphalt. Still warm. I pointed my flashlight toward the horizon, half expecting to see a wreck or taillights in the distance. Nothing but empty black desert and a faint shimmer of heat. When I turned back toward the truck, I saw something that made my stomach twist. My own headlights illuminated a second set of tire tracks that hadn't been there before. Identical to the first ones, but running parallel on the opposite lane, stopping at the same point. As I stared, I realized they lined up perfectly, as if two trucks had approached each other, braked hard, and then both disappeared. A sound broke the silence, a faint clicking like metal tapping against glass. I turned in every direction, but the sound didn't echo. It was all around me, close and far at the same time. Then the wind came, sudden and strong, whipping sand across the road. I jogged back to the cab, slammed the door, and locked it out of instinct. The CB crackled. I hadn't touched it. A voice came through, low and distorted. "You shouldn't stop," it said. Just that, then silence again. I sat there for a long minute, staring at the empty highway. I wanted to turn around, but there was nowhere to go. I pushed the truck back into gear and eased forward. The moment my tires passed the end of those black marks, the radio hissed sharply, and every gauge on the dash dropped to 0. The headlights flickered once, twice, then everything died. The engine, the lights, even the hum of the refrigerator unit in the back. I was left sitting in total darkness. The desert at night is a strange thing. When there's no sound at all, you start to imagine one. My ears rang so loud I thought I'd gone deaf. Then I saw a faint red glow reflect off the windshield ahead, hovering in the dark about 50 yards down the road. The same flickering light. But this time it wasn't moving away. It was moving toward me. I tried the ignition. Nothing. Tried again, pumping the pedal. Still dead. The glow kept coming slowly, pulsing brighter with each second. I could see now that it wasn't one light but two side by side about the height of headlights. I told myself it was another truck, someone stopping to help. But as it drew closer, I realized how wrong that was. There was no engine noise, no vibration, just the glow moving smoothly across the asphalt, too steady, too quiet. I leaned forward, trying to see shapes in the dark. When the lights reached within 20 feet, they stopped. My heart hammered in my chest. I reached for the flashlight on the dash, turned it on, and shined it straight ahead. There was nothing there. No vehicle, no person, just the empty road and my own beam cutting through the dust. Then, as if something invisible passed through me, every system in the truck roared back to life. The headlights blasted on, the radio blared static, and the engine revved high like it had been holding its breath. The light ahead vanished completely. My dashboard clock read 3:17 a.m., though only 30 minutes had passed since I'd first seen the light. I floored the gas pedal, stayed wide-eyed until I reached the next town, and didn't stop until sunrise. The next day, while refueling in Fort Stockton, I mentioned it to another driver. He went pale the moment I said mile marker 83. Said a tanker had jackknifed there 15 years ago, caught fire, burned so hot the asphalt melted. The driver's body was never found. Some say the taillight was still burning when they arrived, flickering in the dark long after the rest of the rig had been reduced to twisted metal. I've driven through West Texas 100 times since then, but I never take that stretch anymore. When dispatch routes me west, I go an hour out of my way, down through smaller county roads. I tell myself it's just because of the rough pavement and fewer patrols, but the truth is simpler. Some nights, when I'm too tired to think straight and the desert stretches out in front of me again, I start to see a faint red glimmer way out in the distance, always just far enough ahead to look like a promise or a warning, depending on the night. And I know better than to follow it. Just past midnight, the mechanic was driving home from a job that had taken longer than expected. County Road 9 was the kind of two-lane blacktop you didn't want to break down on. No cell signal, no street lights, just miles of mesquite, cedar, and the occasional rusted mailbox. The only sound was the steady hum of the truck's engine and the low buzz of tires on old asphalt. His name was Mark Harlan, 42, born and raised in Llano County. He'd worked engines since he was 15, and he could fix anything from a mower to a semi, but what happened that night was something he couldn't explain. And even years later, he still woke up drenched in sweat, dreaming about that stretch of road. He saw it around mile 7, a small object sitting dead center on the pavement, catching the beam of his headlights. At first, he thought it was roadkill. Then as he slowed down, he realized it was a child's tricycle. Pink, rusted, one handlebar wrapped in faded tape, the kind of toy you'd see leaning against a fence in the front yard of a farmhouse. Only there were no houses here, not for at least 5 miles in either direction. He rolled to a stop, put the truck in park, and got out. The night air hit him colder than it should have been for early April. It wasn't the kind of chill that came from the wind, but the kind that crawled under your skin. He looked around, scanning the brush on both sides of the road. Nothing but blackness, the faint chirp of crickets and a long sigh of wind that moved through the trees like someone exhaling. He muttered to himself and bent down to move the tricycle out of the way. The moment his hands touched the metal, the air around him changed. It went still. The crickets stopped. Even the leaves froze. He could hear his own breathing loud in his ears. Then came the sound of an engine behind him. Headlights flared across the pavement, bright and sudden. He stood and turned, shielding his eyes. A car, older model, maybe a sedan, was idling about 30 feet behind his truck. The headlights burned white, but the interior was completely dark. He couldn't see a driver. No movement. No shape behind the glass. Mark took a few steps forward, holding up a hand, ready to say something. But the words caught in his throat when he noticed there was no sound. No hum from the motor. No rumble from the tires. The car wasn't running at all. He walked closer, squinting through the glare. That's when both headlights flickered once like a dying bulb and went out. Total darkness, the kind you can't breathe in. He froze, his pulse kicking. The night stayed silent for a long, unbearable moment before the crickets started again. Louder than before, almost frantic. He stumbled back toward his truck, climbed inside, and slammed the door. The tricycle was still sitting off to the shoulder where he'd set it, glinting in the headlights. He threw the truck into drive and pressed the gas, his hands slick on the wheel. He didn't look back, but for the next 3 miles he felt headlights behind him. Not saw, felt that faint heat on the back of your neck when someone's staring. He checked the mirror again and again, but the road was empty, just the red dust rising behind his tires. He told himself it was nerves. Sleep deprivation. Maybe the tricycle had been dumped from a moving truck. Maybe the lights had been his imagination, a reflection. But when he finally reached the highway and saw the gas station lights ahead, something inside him unclenched. The old man who ran the night shift, Hank, knew Mark well enough to see something was wrong. "You look like you've seen a ghost," he said, half laughing. Mark just nodded, poured himself coffee from the machine, and tried to steady his hands. He started to tell Hank about the tricycle but stopped halfway through. He didn't want to sound crazy. Hank noticed his silence and asked what road he'd come down. When Mark said County Road 9, the old man's face went pale. He looked toward the door like he was expecting something to be standing there. "Son," he said slowly, "you don't stop on that road at night." "Not since the accident." Mark frowned. "What accident?" he asked, though part of him didn't want to know. Hank leaned on the counter, voice low. "Little girl went missing out there about 10 years back. Family lived down near the creek bend. Truck ran him off the road, nobody ever found the driver. The only thing left was her tricycle. Sheriff's boys said it was sitting right in the middle of the lane when they showed up. Same spot you're talking about." Mark didn't say anything. He just stared into his coffee, the steam twisting like smoke. On his way home that night, he took the long way around, even though it added 20 minutes. But sleep didn't come easy. He kept seeing those lights flare behind him in the dark, that faint outline of the tricycle sitting where it shouldn't be. A week later, curiosity got the better of him. He told himself he just wanted to see if maybe there was some logical explanation, maybe some local kids pulling a prank. So he drove out again, this time just before sunset. County Road 9 looked different in the daylight. Less menacing, more lonely. The fields on either side had gone wild, brush stretching knee-high, fences sagging under their own rust. He slowed down when he reached the place. The asphalt there looked different, almost warped, like heat mirage, but it wasn't hot out. He parked the truck on the shoulder and stepped out. The tricycle was gone, but the tire marks were still there. Not just his from last week, but older ones layered beneath, faded into the pavement. A dozen sets, all curving slightly to the same point before stopping cold, mid-road as if the vehicles had vanished into thin air. The grass near the ditch was pressed down too, circular patches where something heavy might have sat. He crouched and touched the ground. It was cold, colder than the air, colder than stone. A sound drifted from the trees then. The faint squeak of a wheel turning. He looked up fast. It came again, soft and slow like a child's toy rolling back and forth. He scanned the brush, squinting through the thick green. Nothing moved, but the sound came closer, steady and deliberate. Mark backed up toward his truck. The sun dipped behind the trees, shadows stretching long across the road. The air shifted again, a deep drop in temperature that made his breath come out in white plumes. His hand shook as he reached for the door handle. That's when he saw the reflection in the side mirror, headlights flaring to life behind him. Same as before, same distance, same silent hum. He spun around and there it was again. The old sedan, lights burning but no driver, no sound, no movement. His heart hammered in his chest. The car rolled forward a few feet, slow, deliberate, tires whispering across the asphalt. He stumbled into his truck, started the engine, and slammed the accelerator. Gravel spat from the tires as he tore off down the road. He didn't look back this time. Couldn't. He drove straight to the sheriff's office in town. Told them everything. They humored him at first until they drove out there the next morning. The sheriff called him later that day. Said there was no sign of any car, no tricycle, no fresh tracks. But when Mark asked about the tire marks in the road, the sheriff paused. Said there weren't any. Asphalt was smooth, like it had been repaved. Mark quit his late shifts not long after that, started working only daytime hours. He never took County Road 9 again, but sometimes when he was closing the garage at night and the wind came up from the hills, he'd swear he could hear it faintly through the trees. the creak of a wheel turning and the faint laughter of a child carried on the cold air. The desert outside Barstow has a kind of silence that feels heavier than most places. It's not the absence of sound, but the weight of it, the way it presses down on you until even your own breathing feels too loud. I'd been driving that stretch of Highway 58 for years, long-haul runs between Bakersfield and Needles, sometimes all the way to Flagstaff if dispatch was feeling cruel. That night the fog came in low and strange, rolling across the asphalt like smoke from a brush fire. I'd never seen it that thick out here before. The desert isn't supposed to have fog like that, not this far inland, but it clung to the ground in pale sheets that made my headlights look like two yellow coins floating in milk. I slowed down to 40, leaning forward over the wheel, the wipers squeaking in slow, useless arcs. Around a mile past the Barstow city limit sign, I saw her. At first it didn't register as a person, just a pale shape at the edge of the road. The fog distorted everything, bending light and distance. I thought it might have been a traffic cone or a deer, but as I rolled closer I could make out a figure standing completely still in the breakdown lane. One arm at her side, the other slightly raised like she was about to flag someone down but had changed her mind. A woman dressed in a long gray coat that reached her knees. The taillights of my truck glowed red against the fog as I eased to a stop a few yards ahead of her. I remember thinking she looked too calm to be in trouble. Not frantic, not waving, just waiting. I stepped out and immediately felt how cold the air was. The desert usually cools off at night, but this was different. It bit through my jacket, cold and wet like winter coastal air. My boots crunched the gravel as I walked toward her, and she didn't move. Her hair was dark and straight, hanging to her shoulders, and her face was pale in the fog, the kind of pale that doesn't look natural. I asked if she was all right, if she needed help. For a second, she didn't respond at all, just stared past me toward the stretch of highway I'd come from. Then she said in a low voice that didn't sound frightened, "There was an accident." I looked around. There were no cars, no tire marks, nothing. The fog was so thick I could barely see the road reflectors 10 feet away. I asked her what happened, if someone was hurt, but she just looked at me and said again, "There was an accident." Her voice was steady but flat, like she was reciting a fact she'd repeated too many times. I told her I'd call for help and went back to the truck to grab my phone. But when I looked down, there was no signal. That's normal enough out there, but something about it made my stomach knot. When I turned back, she was standing closer, maybe 5 feet away now, though I hadn't heard her move. I asked her name. She said it was Laura. Her breath didn't fog the air when she spoke. I tried to glance past her, thinking maybe her car had gone off the shoulder, maybe she was in shock, but all I could see was fog and desert scrub. Then she asked me almost gently, "Do you see the lights?" I followed her gaze. Through the fog, faint at first but growing brighter, were headlights in the distance. 2 beams cutting through the mist, approaching fast. I stepped back, worried someone might not see us until it was too late. I waved my arms, trying to signal the driver to slow down. But the lights didn't change speed. They kept coming, steady, unwavering. "Get off the road," I told her, but she didn't move. The lights bore down on us, close enough that I should have heard an engine by now, but there was nothing. No rumble, no tires on asphalt, just those white beams. I turned toward her again, and she was smiling faintly, eyes reflecting the light. Then, without a sound, the headlights passed straight through her and disappeared. No car, no wind, no sound, just the dark and the fog again, thick and cold and silent. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, and she was gone. The spot where she'd been standing was empty. I ran toward the shoulder, shining my flashlight around, calling her name, but the beam cut through nothing but mist. I was alone. I stood there for maybe a minute, trying to make sense of it, when I noticed the ground beneath my boots was darker, almost black. I crouched down and touched it. It was smooth and uneven at the same time, like tar that had hardened, a scorched patch of asphalt roughly in the shape of a car. There were faint grooves leading off the road, and a twisted fragment of chrome half buried in the dirt. That's when I remembered. There'd been a bad wreck out here years ago. I'd heard the older drivers talk about it at the diner in Barstow. A couple driving late at night, the man dozed off behind the wheel. They'd gone off the road and flipped twice before the car exploded. Killed both instantly. The woman's name, if I remembered right, was Laura. I felt something move beside me then, a soft rustle like fabric brushing metal. When I turned, the fog shifted, and for a split second I saw her reflection in the passenger window of my truck. Not her face directly, but her shape standing just behind me. The reflection lingered even after I spun around and found nothing there. I climbed back into the cab, slammed the door, and started the engine. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. I drove the rest of the way to Needles with the heater on full blast, trying not to look in the mirrors. Every time the fog thinned for a moment, I swore I could see faint headlights behind me, keeping pace at a distance, never gaining, never falling back. When I stopped for gas near Ludlow, I mentioned it to the attendant, mostly to convince myself I wasn't crazy. He looked at me for a long time before nodding. "Yeah," he said quietly. "You saw her. Happens now and then. Always near mile marker 1 on 12, that's where it happened." He didn't need to explain what it was. He told me truckers used to report the same thing, seeing a woman on the shoulder asking for help, saying there'd been an accident. Some pulled over, some didn't, but they all said the same thing about the headlights. They always appear just before she vanishes. I didn't sleep that night. Couldn't. I kept replaying her voice in my head, that calm way she said it, as if the accident wasn't something that had happened once, but something still happening, over and over. I tried looking it up later, and sure enough, I found the old newspaper clipping online. October 12, 2003. The photo was grainy, but you could just make out the wreckage, charred and twisted. The article mentioned the victims, Laura and Stephen Cates, both 28. Married 2 years. The coroner's report said she died instantly, but what caught my eye was a line near the end that said witnesses reported seeing another car pull over shortly before the crash, possibly to help, but the driver was never identified. Now every time I drive that stretch of road, I can feel it coming before I see it. The air gets heavier, colder. The fog creeps low over the ground, even on clear nights. I keep my eyes straight ahead, never slowing down, never looking to the shoulder. But sometimes I still catch a glimpse in the side mirror. A figure standing where the road dips slightly, her coat fluttering in the still air. And every single time, just as the fog thickens, I see those headlights again, bright and silent, coming fast out of the dark, never stopping. The highway out of Alpine stretched flat and lonely, an endless ribbon of black cutting through the scrubland. Patrolman Hank Dalton had driven that stretch of Highway 118 for almost 15 years, from the dusty gas stations near Study Butte to the long bend before the Davis Mountains. He knew every mile marker, every patch of cracked asphalt that made his cruiser rattle, every fence post that caught moonlight. But for the last few months, something had changed about that road. Something had begun whispering back. It started in mid-January, the kind of night where the desert was too quiet and the air too still. He was parked at mile marker 47, sipping from a thermos and watching the static flicker across his dashcam screen. His radio hissed softly in the background, the kind of background noise you stop hearing after so many years. Then, at exactly 2:17 a.m., the static rose, sharper, almost like it was being pushed through a throat instead of a speaker. It formed a sound, not quite a word, then a voice, faint but unmistakable. It said his name, just one word, drawn out and breathless. Hank. He froze, looking at the receiver, then out at the dark. The desert wind pressed lightly against the driver's side door. He waited, heart thudding, but the channel went back to static, the kind that seemed to crawl under your skin. He checked the frequency, thinking it might be another unit out near Marathon or Fort Davis. But the system showed no active transmissions. When he called dispatch to confirm, the operator said nobody had broadcast in the last 20 minutes. It could have been a prank, he told himself. Some teenager with a ham radio, maybe. There were a few kids who liked to race down the road at night. He logged the incident, kept his voice steady, and went back to his rounds. But the next night it happened again. Same stretch of road, same time, same whisper. By the third week it was ritual. He didn't plan to be at that exact spot each time, but somehow he always was. And every time his name came through as though someone was right beside him, whispering into the mic with their mouth almost touching the grill. Hank. He tried to record it once, setting up the dash cam to catch both his radio and his reaction. But when he played the footage back later, the radio was silent. No static, no voice, only him staring at the mic with his jaw tight and his eyes wide. When he checked the timestamp, it read 2:17 a.m. exactly. The voice started saying other things after that. Fragments at first, hard to catch over the static. Things like stop or don't, or sometimes just the faint rhythm of breathing, like whoever it was didn't know how to speak anymore. It made the hair rise along his neck. He didn't tell anyone. Not his supervisor, not dispatch, not even his ex-wife when she called to ask why he'd sounded tired lately. There was no explaining something like that without sounding crazy. One night, curiosity won. He parked right on the shoulder by mile marker 47, turned off his headlights and waited. The desert stretched black and endless around him. The stars looked too sharp, like holes punched through the sky. He could hear the hum of power lines, the tick of the cooling engine. Then, right on time, the static began. It built slowly like a storm forming far away, and then came the whisper dragging through the speakers. Hank. He lifted the receiver. "Who is this?" he said, his voice low. No response. Only the faint crackle and then a sound that made his stomach twist. A gasp, a wet, choking breath. And then the voice again, weaker this time, almost pleading. "Help me." He dropped the mic and stared out at the empty road. Something glinted near the bend ahead. Headlights, he thought. A vehicle maybe 20 yards away, half off the asphalt. But when he stepped out of his cruiser, the air hit him like ice. His breath came out in white ribbons. He hadn't seen frost in months, not out here. He walked forward, boots crunching the gravel shoulder, his flashlight slicing through the dark. The beam caught something metallic. An old bumper buried in weeds rusted through. A wreck, he realized. Long abandoned. The kind of thing that should have been towed years ago. But there was something else. Faint, like the outline of a door still closed long after the building's gone. A shape in the air, pale and flickering, sitting behind the wheel. For a second, it looked solid. A woman, maybe 30, head bent, hair falling across her face. Then she was gone like a film reel burning out mid-frame. Hank stumbled back, heart hammering. The air grew colder still. The radio inside his cruiser screeching with static so loud he could hear it from the road. Then it stopped. He filed no report that night. He just drove home, windows rolled up tight, eyes flicking to the mirror every few seconds. He didn't sleep when he got home. He sat at his kitchen table until dawn, staring at his radio as if it might start talking again. The next day, he went through the old records. Highway 118 had its share of wrecks, mostly deer hits and drowsy tourists. But one entry caught his attention. A single-car accident 20 years ago to the week. A woman named Linda Caro died at 2:17 a.m. Car went off the road near mile marker 47. No passengers. No sign of foul play. He stared at the report until the letters blurred. The coroner's note said her body had been found by another patrolman, slumped over the wheel, radio still on. Frequency listed 155.970, the same as his. That night he switched frequencies. He told dispatch his radio was acting up, interference on the channel. They gave him a temporary code. For 2 nights there was silence. He almost believed it was over. Then on the 3rd night, as he was checking speed traps near the turnoff to Terlingua, the radio flickered again. Static, faint, barely audible. Then through it, the same voice. Quieter, distant, like it was struggling to reach him. "Hank, please don't change it." The sound of breathing filled the cab, shallow, broken. He switched the channel off entirely, heart pounding, but the noise didn't stop. The whisper kept coming, faint and patient, like someone was sitting in the back seat. He pulled over hard, killed the ignition, and sat there listening to the desert. The voice was gone. Only the wind moved now. He turned in his seat and shone his flashlight across the back of the cruiser. Empty. But the air was colder again, so cold it made his teeth ache. The radio, dead seconds ago, clicked once. Then a sound came through, not static this time, but the faint echo of an engine idling. A woman's voice, softer now, closer. "I didn't mean to crash." Something inside him broke then. He left the radio on the seat and stepped out into the dark, hands trembling. The air smelled faintly of burnt rubber and rain, though the sky was clear. When he looked back toward the highway, he saw headlights again. An old sedan, its grille crumpled, steam rising from the hood. It was parked exactly where he'd seen the ghostly outline weeks before, and through the cracked windshield he saw her. Head tilted, eyes open, staring right at him. He took a step forward and the headlights blinked out. The car was gone. The desert was silent again. Only the hum of the distant power lines remained. He drove back to town, said nothing to anyone, and turned in his resignation papers the next morning. Said he'd had enough of night shifts, enough of that road. But sometimes when he sits up late, The old radio he kept as a souvenir will crackle to life. He doesn't keep it plugged in. It has no power source. Still, every now and then he'll hear it whisper, always at 2:17, always the same voice, soft pleading, familiar now. Hank, help me find the road. The desert outside Sanderson always looked the same after dark. A black sea of brush and rock stretching beyond the reach of the headlights. Miles passed without a single structure, just the endless ribbon of Highway 90 and the occasional carcass of a deer or armadillo caught in the glow. I had been driving since San Antonio, pushing west toward El Paso, fighting fatigue with lukewarm coffee in a country station that faded in and out of static. Around midnight, my gas gauge began to dip below a quarter. I hadn't passed a service sign in an hour. The map app showed nothing but a straight line through emptiness. I figured I'd make it to Marathon, maybe Alpine, before I really needed to stop. But then the needle hit red and I saw lights ahead. They appeared faint at first, like the shimmer of heat mirages even though the air was cool. A glow off to the right of the road, pale yellow against the dark. As I drew closer, I saw the flicker of a neon sign half buried in dust. It buzzed weakly, letters missing or broken, but I could still make out the words, Gas and Market, Sanderson Junction. The name struck me because I didn't remember seeing any town called Sanderson Junction on my map. Still, the pumps looked old but functional, and the small brick station beside them had a single light above the door, attracting a swirl of moths. When I pulled in, the air felt different, heavier somehow, as if I had passed through an invisible veil. My headlights reflected off the old glass window, showing shelves stocked with dusty cans and faded chip bags. The pumps were manual, the kind with flip numbers. I got out, the gravel crunching under my boots, and filled up while scanning the desert. Not a single car passed on the highway. The wind barely moved. I could hear the low hum of insects and something else underneath it, like a faint vibration in the air. When I tried to dismiss it as my imagination, the station door creaked open. A man stepped out. He was in his 60s maybe, wearing a gray button-up and a red cap so faded it looked pink. His face was hard to read in the dim light, but his voice was calm, almost too calm when he said, "Evening. Long drive?" "Yeah," I said. "Didn't think I'd find a place open out here." He smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "We stay open late. Folks pass through at all hours." "Headed west?" "El Paso." He nodded slowly. "Keep to the main road. Don't take the cutoff." I froze for a second. "What cutoff?" He just shrugged and turned back toward the station door. "Best to pay inside. Card reader's been acting up." I followed him in, the bell above the door giving a sharp metallic ring that echoed too long. Inside smelled like old oil and something faintly sweet, like rotting fruit. The shelves were lined with brands I didn't recognize, the kind you'd see in photos from the 70s. A radio behind the counter played static, occasionally cutting into fragments of a country song. The man rang up the sale on an old register that clicked loudly with each number. He handed me a paper receipt with faded blue ink and said, "Safe travels." As I reached for the door, I noticed a bulletin board beside it, covered in old flyers and Polaroid photos. Some of the papers were yellowed and brittle, but the top row caught my attention. It showed pictures of cars, station wagons, trucks, sedans, all parked in front of the very same gas station. Each photo had a date scrawled underneath in pen. The most recent one said 1987. When I turned to ask the man about it, he was gone. The counter stood empty, the radio silent. I waited a second, then stepped outside. The lights above the pumps flickered twice and went out. Only my headlights lit the lot. I climbed into the car, started the engine, and tried not to look back. As I pulled onto the highway, I felt something odd, a pressure in my chest like the air inside the car had thickened. My mirrors reflected nothing but blackness. The glow of the station disappeared faster than it should have, swallowed by the desert. For the next 30 miles, I didn't see another sign of life. When I finally reached Marathon, I checked into a small roadside motel and fell asleep with the TV on. I woke up around 10 the next morning, sunlight cutting through the blinds. When I stepped out, I decided to drive back east a bit to double-check where exactly I'd stopped the night before. The map still showed nothing marked as Sanderson Junction, but I remembered the exact mile marker. I drove for nearly 40 minutes before realizing I was back where it should have been. Only there was nothing there. No building, no sign, no pumps. Just open desert. I parked on the shoulder and walked out onto the sand. The wind had picked up, carrying fine dust that clung to my boots. I found what might have been tire tracks leading a few feet off the road, but they stopped abruptly. No foundations, no debris, just the faint smell of fuel hanging in the air. I crouched down and picked up something half buried in the dirt, a corner of paper, brittle and yellow. When I brushed it off, I realized it was a receipt. The same faded blue ink, the same name, Sanderson Junction Market. The date printed on it was July 16th, 1987. I drove straight to the sheriff's office in Sanderson. The deputy behind the desk gave me a look like I'd told him a ghost story. "You must have been near where the old junction used to be," he said finally. "Burned down in the 80s. Fella running it fell asleep with a space heater in back. Whole place went up, killed him and his boy. Folks still see lights out there sometimes." I tried to explain that I'd been there, that I'd spoken to the man, that the pumps had worked. But the deputy just smiled politely and said, "Happens more than you'd think. Desert plays tricks on you." When I left, I drove west again, but I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was still watching me from that stretch of road. I checked my rearview mirror every few minutes. Around dusk, when the sun dipped low and the highway turned to gold, I glanced down at my passenger seat. The paper receipt I'd found was gone. In its place was something else. A Polaroid photo, faded and creased, showing my car parked in front of the gas station. The date scrawled underneath read the same as before, 1987. The desert stayed silent after that. I didn't stop again until El Paso, but even there, when I filled up, the pump made that same slow clicking sound as it flipped through the numbers. And when I closed my eyes that night in the motel, I could still hear the man's voice somewhere in the static of my dreams, saying softly, "Keep to the main road. Don't take the cutoff." Under the low orange sky of a late Texas evening, the westbound lanes of I-10 stretched empty and endless. The sun had slipped behind a distant ridge near Fort Stockton, leaving only a red smear above the desert scrub. Evan gripped the wheel while his wife, Marissa, dozed with her head against the window. They'd been on the road since San Antonio, headed toward El Paso for a weekend with her sister. When the GPS announced a lane closure ahead and suggested a detour at exit 214, Evan obeyed without much thought. The ramp curved down into darkness and the highway noise faded behind them. The asphalt narrowed, then turned to a cracked two-lane road lined with mesquite and scattered mailboxes. He expected to see another sign directing them back to I-10, but the road just kept going, dipping through a dry creek and climbing again toward a small cluster of lights. The first thing they saw was a diner, the kind with a tin roof and a flickering neon sign that read, "Eats." Next door stood a gas station with a single ancient pump and a row of dim streetlights. Beyond that were a few houses, most of them dark. The air had that flat, silent weight you get in places far from cell towers or interstates. Marissa stirred, blinking at the window. "Where are we?" she asked. "Junction Town, I guess," Evan said. "GPS says it's called—" He glanced at his phone. The blue arrow floated in a gray void. No town name, no route number, just a white road looping back toward itself. "That's weird," he muttered. "Signal's gone." They parked by the diner. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed and the clock over the counter read 9:13. A woman behind the counter smiled too broadly when they entered. Her apron was spotless, her hair the same lifeless shade of brown as the linoleum. "Evening, folks," she said. "You're just in time before we close." The smell of burnt coffee and fried meat hung thick in the air. Evan ordered burgers and 2 Cokes. Marissa excused herself to the restroom. The woman moved slowly as if remembering the motions of a job she hadn't done in years. Through the window, Evan saw the street, empty except for a slow-moving truck that seemed to pass the diner again and again, always turning at the far corner and coming back the other way. Each time it passed, its headlights washed over the glass, and he glimpsed the driver's pale face staring straight ahead. When Marissa returned, her expression was uneasy. "There's no mirror in there," she whispered. "Just a window over the sink, but it's covered in dust. I could swear someone was on the other side of it." Evan forced a chuckle, but the waitress was watching them now, motionless, her hands clasped on the counter. "You folks from the highway?" she asked. Evan nodded. "Took exit 214, GPS messed up." The woman's smile tightened. "Oh," she said softly. "You shouldn't have taken that one." Before he could ask, she slid the plate across the counter. "You'll want to finish quick. The lights go out soon." They ate in silence. The food tasted off, too salty, the meat oddly sweet. When they stepped outside, the streetlights buzzed and dimmed one by one, leaving only the diner's neon sign sputtering red and pink against the dark. The same truck rolled past again, slower this time. As its headlights swept over the houses, every window glowed faintly, and behind each pane was a face. The same face. White, expressionless, eyes wide and unblinking. It was the waitress's face multiplied across every building. Marissa grabbed his arm. "Evan, look." In the reflection of the diner's window, the neon sign flickered backward. "Stay." And for a second he saw their own faces mirrored in the glass. Except their eyes were wrong, blank and glassy like the others. They ran to the car. The engine turned but wouldn't catch. The truck stopped in the intersection ahead and idled, its lights pointing directly at them. Behind them, another vehicle appeared, then another, until a slow procession of identical trucks formed a circle around the diner lot, engines humming in sync. Each cab held a single driver, every one of them with the same pale face. Evan slammed the gear shift into reverse, but the tires only spun on the cracked pavement. He looked up at the diner window. The waitress stood inside, watching, smiling faintly. Then the neon sign went out, plunging everything into black. When the lights came back, they were alone. The trucks, the diner, even the road behind them were gone. The car sat idling at the edge of a dirt field. Evan blinked at the dash clock, 9:13 again. Marissa whispered that they should try to find the interstate. He turned the car around and drove east, but after 10 minutes the same diner appeared. Same sign, same truck pulling around the corner. He tried the opposite direction. The diner returned again, identical down to the flickering E. Panic clawed at his chest. Marissa's phone finally blinked to life, but the GPS spun in circles, then froze on a blank grid. She zoomed out. No towns, no roads, no state lines, only gray emptiness. They drove through what felt like the entire night, looping past the diner again and again. Each time something small had changed. The waitress's smile a bit wider. A different song playing faintly through the static on the radio. The number on the clock still fixed at 9:13. Around what should have been dawn, the gas gauge hit empty, yet the car kept running. Marissa stopped speaking, staring out the window with tears running silently down her cheeks. "We'll get out," Evan said, though he didn't believe it anymore. The horizon never lightened, and the desert beyond the town limits seemed to dissolve into mist as if the world ended there. At some point, exhaustion won. He parked by the diner again and slumped forward against the wheel. When he opened his eyes, daylight burned through the windshield. The car sat on the shoulder of I-10, engine cold, sun high overhead. Trucks roared past, ordinary traffic. Marissa stirred awake, her voice hoarse. "We're back?" she asked. Evan nodded numbly, stepping out into the heat. The air smelled of sage and dust. Across the highway stood a rusted green sign. Exit 214 closed. No access. He turned to Marissa, but she was staring through the glass of the passenger window. Her reflection looked back at him, but her face in the reflection didn't blink when she did. It only smiled, wide and patient, the same way the waitress had. When he opened the door, there was no one inside, just the faint scent of coffee and something sweet, and on the passenger seat a napkin from the diner, perfectly clean with the words, "Come back soon," written in faded red ink. He looked down the empty ramp behind the barrier, but there was only open desert shimmering in the heat. No road, no lights, no town. Yet from somewhere beneath the wind, faint and steady, came the hum of engines turning in unison, waiting for night to fall again. Under the blistering Texas sun, the heat off the blacktop shimmered like water, twisting the horizon into a wavering mirage that made everything ahead look alive. Ben Keller kept his arm propped on the open window, the dry wind whipping at his sweat-soaked sleeve as he rolled west on Highway 285 toward Pecos. He'd been driving since dawn, a half-empty cooler in the passenger seat, and the faint buzz of old country radio flickering in and out between static. His truck's AC had quit 2 summers ago, and though he always told himself he'd get it fixed, somehow he never did. The road heat was something he'd grown used to, almost comforted by. But that afternoon it started to feel different. Meaner, heavier, like the air itself was alive and pressing in. He saw the hitchhiker sometime past noon, just a blur ahead, standing right in the middle of the road where the heat pooled thickest, his shape warping and quivering like oil on water. Ben squinted. The figure was tall, wearing something pale, a button-up maybe, and holding one arm slightly out as if asking for a ride. Nothing unusual. People still hitched rides out here, especially near the oil fields or small border towns. But what caught Ben's attention was that the man didn't move when the truck got close. Usually they'd step aside or wave, but this one just stood there, face hidden in the glare. Ben slowed down, unsure if he should stop, but the instant his front bumper crossed the figure's shadow, it was gone. Just gone. No jump to the shoulder, no dust cloud, no shape in the rear view. Only the hot shimmer rolling back into the empty highway behind him. Ben exhaled, his heart pounding a little harder than it should have. Heat mirages could play tricks. He told himself that. But a few seconds later, the smell hit. Something faint but distinct. Burnt rubber and cheap men's cologne, like the air in an old barbershop right before closing time. It clung in the cab of his truck, thick and stale. He reached for the radio, switched the static, and forced a laugh. "I'm losing it," he muttered. But the smell didn't fade. Even after rolling down both windows and lighting a cigarette to mask it, it lingered, stubborn as memory. When he pulled into a roadside diner in Fort Stockton, he mentioned it offhand to the waitress. "You ever seen someone out there right past the junction, standing in the heat?" She frowned, pushing a refill across his table. "You mean on 285? Yeah. People say there's a hitcher been showing up there for years. Old story." Her tone was casual, but her eyes lingered a moment too long. "My uncle swears he saw him once back in the 80s. Said he stopped, but when he got out, there wasn't anyone there. Just smelled smoke." She gave a small shrug. "Folks call him the Blacktop Ghost." "Nobody stops twice," Ben grinned. "Ghost hitchhiker. That's a new one." She didn't smile back. "Not that new." Then she turned away. He finished his burger and left a tip. But when he got back to the truck, the cab still carried that same clinging scent. He didn't think much more about it until later that evening when the sun began to die low behind the hills, and the asphalt bled orange under the light. He'd planned to camp out near Balmorhea, maybe throw a line in the lake, but the closer he got, the less he wanted to stop. The air had taken on a strange stillness, the kind that made cicadas quiet and shadows stretch too long. Then he saw it again. Just past a bend near a bridge, the shimmer appeared. A figure in the middle of the lane, standing as before, hand out. This time he saw more. Light jeans, a white shirt tucked into a belt, and something that glinted like a watch on the left wrist. Ben slowed to a crawl, telling himself to look, to really look. The man's head tilted slightly as if he were waiting, and then, once again, the figure blinked out like a mirage dissolving into air. The road was empty. But the smell followed, stronger this time. Burnt rubber, hot tar, and that same tired cologne seeping into the vents. He stopped on the shoulder and got out. The heat struck him full in the face, dry and thick enough to taste. Nothing moved, not a lizard, not a bird. He leaned against the hood, scanning the long stretch ahead. The asphalt shimmered gently in the dying light, rippling like a living thing. And faintly, just barely, he heard something. A low hum, like an idling engine somewhere far off, rising and fading as if circling. Then came a sound like footsteps, soft dragging ones behind him. When he turned, there was no one there, only his own footprints in the dust. But when he climbed back into the truck, the passenger seat belt was buckled. He stared at it, just buckled neatly, the way someone would do if they'd settled in. The cab smelled thick now, almost choking. He unbuckled the belt slowly and started the engine. The dashboard clock flickered once, then froze, 2:17 p.m., though he knew it was closer to 7. As he drove, the hum grew louder, until it sounded like a second engine pacing him just outside the driver's window. He glanced, but the reflection showed only open desert. No headlights behind, no car in the mirror. Still he could feel the presence, a weight beside him, pressing into the heat. By the time he reached Balmorhea, his nerves were frayed raw. He pulled into a tiny auto court, the kind with faded neon and peeling paint, and paid cash for a night. The clerk was an old man with sun-leathered skin who barely looked up. "Long day on the road?" the man asked. "You could say that," Ben said. "Passed a hitchhiker earlier. Thought I saw him twice." The clerk's pen paused midair. "White shirt, stands right in the shimmer?" "Yeah." The old man nodded slowly, like he'd been waiting for that answer. "You ain't the first. Smells like burnt tires after, don't it?" "Yeah," Ben whispered. "Every time." The clerk sighed and handed over a key. "You might want to park facing out. Easier to leave if you need to?" He didn't elaborate. Ben tried to sleep, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw that heat-distorted figure, motionless, watching. Around 2 in the morning, he woke to a faint squeal outside, like rubber on pavement. Then the smell drifted in again, unmistakable and fresh. He went to the window. The parking lot was empty except for his truck, but under the orange glow of the motel sign, he saw a single dark streak on the asphalt, like something had been dragged or burned. It led from the far end of the lot straight to his door. He packed up and left before dawn, the desert sky just starting to pale. The road felt colder then, though the air was still thick. He told himself it was a trick of exhaustion, a story stuck in his head. But a few miles outside of town, the passenger seat belt clicked again. Slowly, without anyone touching it, he looked down. It was buckled tight. He slammed the brakes. The truck screeched to a stop, tires smoking. When the dust settled, he sat frozen, staring ahead. In the rising heat shimmer, the hitchhiker stood once more, no more than 20 feet ahead, arm raised. For the first time, Ben saw his face. It wasn't a face at all, just burned skin pulled tight across bone, blackened around the eyes and mouth. His lips moved soundlessly, and behind him the air rippled harder, revealing for a second the ghostly outline of a car, mangled, overturned, fire still glowing faintly through its frame. Then both were gone, swallowed by the glare. Ben threw the truck into gear and drove without looking back. But no matter how many miles he put between them, the smell wouldn't leave. It's been 3 summers since, and the truck still carries it. Burnt rubber and old cologne baked deep into the seats. Sometimes, when the highway's empty and the heat starts to dance again, he catches a glimpse of movement in the mirror. A pale shirt, a raised hand, always waiting in the shimmer somewhere just ahead. It was just after 9 when Ray Puller's radiator gave out. The desert between Fort Stockton and Marathon stretched endlessly on both sides. A dark, flat ocean of sand and scrub that reflected nothing but heat even at dusk. He had seen the temperature gauge rising for miles, but he pushed on anyway, hoping to make it to the next town. When the hissing started, it was already too late. He pulled over near an old blue call box, one of those roadside emergency phones that had been left to bake and bleach since cell service made them useless. The air shimmered so hard it looked like the asphalt itself was bending. He could hear cicadas out in the brush, an electric whine that filled the emptiness like static. His wife Laura sat quiet in the passenger seat, clutching her phone that had 1 bar and no data. She looked small in the glow of the dashboard, tired from the long drive from San Antonio. They were heading to El Paso to visit her sister, but it felt like they were driving through some forgotten part of Texas no one cared about anymore. The kind of place that time didn't move right. Ray told her to stay put and stepped out into the heat. The wind was low and dry, carrying the faint scent of creosote and something else he couldn't place, like burnt rubber mixed with hot metal. He walked over to the call box, brushing dust off his jeans. Up close, it looked almost fossilized. The paint was cracked and peeling, the handset sun-bleached to white. But when he picked it up, it felt oddly clean. Not gritty like the rest of the box. The receiver clicked in his hand like it still had power. He hesitated, then pressed the red call button. There was a soft hum, then a click. A voice came through almost immediately, calm and steady. "Mr. Puller, do not hang up." Ray froze. His first thought was that maybe it was one of those state-run systems with caller ID or something. But then the voice spoke again. "We've been expecting your call." His mouth went dry. "Who is this?" he asked, trying to sound casual but hearing the crack in his own voice. The hum on the other end deepened slightly, like whoever it was leaned closer to the mic. "You're on Route 285, 3 miles east of the old rest stop. Your wife Laura's still in the car, correct?" Ray turned sharply toward the car. Laura was looking at him from inside, waving slightly through the windshield. He swallowed hard. "How do you know that?" The voice didn't answer right away. Then softly, "You should get back in the car, Ray. She's going to need you." He dropped the receiver. It hit the metal box with a hollow clang and swung by its cord. The line stayed open, a low hiss coming through it. He looked back toward the car, half expecting Laura to be stepping out. She wasn't. She was still inside, looking at him nervously. He forced himself to laugh, trying to shake it off, and walked back. "It's dead," he told her when he got in. She asked what he meant and he just said, "Old call box useless." He didn't tell her what the voice said. He didn't want her to think he was rattled. They waited in the car while the heat began to fall off the desert like a heavy blanket. Dusk turned to full dark. The temperature dropped fast. Coyotes started up somewhere in the hills, their howls carrying across the open nothing. Laura tried calling for roadside assistance again, but the phone kept failing. She asked if he could flag someone down, but there hadn't been a single car in over an hour. Then from the distance, a faint glow appeared, headlights. Ray stepped out and waved, relieved at first. But the light didn't move like a normal car. It came closer in short bursts like flickers. The air shimmered again. Though now the night was cold enough to make his breath fog, the light stopped about 50 yards away and just stayed there, hanging in the dark like a silent engine running on nothing. "Ray," Laura called through the cracked window. "Maybe come inside." He did, because his skin had gone tight with goose flesh. When he sat back down, he looked in the mirror. The headlights were gone, just gone as if swallowed by the desert, but then the radio flicked on by itself. No station, just a thin band of static like wind whispering through wires. Then a voice came through it, the same calm, steady one from the call box. "You shouldn't have hung up, Ray. We were trying to help." Laura's hand shot to her mouth. "Who was that?" Ray turned off the radio, but it clicked back on again, louder this time. "We told you not to hang up." "Now she's awake?" The voice broke into fragments, the static swelling. "She remembers your name." Ray's heart thudded painfully. He reached for the keys, trying to start the car, but the engine made a strained clicking noise, the kind that means a dead battery. The radio still hummed even without power. Laura was crying quietly, staring out the windshield. "Ray," she whispered, "there's someone out there." He followed her gaze. In the faint light of the moon, he saw a figure standing near the call box. A woman, tall and thin, her hair whipping in the wind. She was facing the car but not moving. Something about the way she stood, arms hanging wrong, head tilted just slightly too far, made his stomach turn. The radio hissed louder, and through it came a voice, not the calm one, but something older, cracked with strain. "You left me on the road." Laura started praying under her breath. Ray slammed his fist on the dashboard. "Who are you?" he shouted, though it came out hoarse. The headlights flickered once faintly, like the battery tried to come alive. The woman outside moved closer, not walking but gliding in short, broken motions. The desert wind grew stronger, howling against the car doors, pushing sand against the windows in soft rasps. The smell of burnt rubber filled the air again, thick and sharp. Ray opened the glove compartment, fumbling for the flashlight. When he turned it on, the beam cut across the windshield, but there was no one there. Just empty highway. He swung the light toward the call box. The handset was hanging again, swinging slowly, tapping against the metal like a pendulum. The radio had gone dead. Everything was silent except for the low whine of the wind. Laura was shaking, her face pale. "We have to go," she said. "Even if we have to walk." Ray wanted to argue, but he couldn't stand sitting there anymore. He grabbed their water bottles and told her to stay close. They started walking east, following the faint silver line of the road under the moonlight. The air was dry enough to crack his lips. They didn't speak for a long time, just kept moving. Behind them, the car sat alone in the middle of the road, hazard lights blinking weakly until they finally faded out. They walked maybe a mile before they saw another call box ahead. Same style, same faded blue paint. Ray stopped short. "Didn't we come from that direction?" Laura asked. "Yes," he said. His throat tightened. "We did." She stepped closer to it anyway, desperate. Maybe it's another one. Maybe it works. She reached for the receiver. Ray grabbed her wrist, but too late. The phone clicked as she lifted it. There was no dial tone, just breathing. Then a soft voice said, "Laura, don't run." She dropped the handset like it burned her. Ray caught a glimpse of movement down the road. Headlights again, flickering on and off, drawing closer. He could hear tires crunching gravel, though there was no engine noise. The air around them seemed to hum like power lines overhead. The radio voice returned, faint but clear this time, carried on the wind. "You were supposed to stay with us, Ray. You both were." Laura screamed. The headlights surged forward too fast. Ray grabbed her and pulled her off the road just as the light tore through where they'd been standing. The air felt like it folded around them. When he opened his eyes, the desert was empty again. No lights, no road, just dust and the faint glow of the moon. The call box was gone too. They were standing in loose sand with no tire tracks, no sign of anything man-made. The silence pressed down on them until it hurt. They wandered for hours until the horizon started to lighten. The cold bit into their bones. Around sunrise, a passing truck found Ray alone, stumbling along the shoulder near mile marker 123. He was sunburned and delirious, mumbling about a phone that knew his name. The sheriff who took the statement said there was no sign of Laura. No footprints, no broken down car. Just the old call box by the side of the road, disconnected since 2004. When they lifted the receiver, they swore they heard someone breathing on the line. And a woman's voice whispering softly, "Tell Ray I made the call." The delivery route out of Midland was supposed to be simple that night. 40 miles west. Drop off 2 pallets of refrigeration parts, sign a form, and head back before midnight. The dispatcher had said it like it was nothing. Just another routine run on a quiet Texas highway. But the thing about driving long stretches alone is that you start to notice small details. The kind that don't add up. And by the time I realized something was wrong, I was already too far gone to turn around. I was driving a company van, white with the logo half peeled off, loaded heavy enough that it swayed when the wind cut across the flat scrubland. My GPS, a cheap unit mounted above the dash, had been acting up all week, freezing or lagging behind the actual road. Around the time I passed an empty rest stop, the screen glitched and reloaded the route. It still showed I had 40 miles to go, but the line shifted, turning off the main highway onto a narrow gray strip marked only as Service or 1137. I didn't think much of it at first. Texas is full of service roads, ranch access roads, and oil field spurs that never make it to proper maps. The system probably found a shortcut, so I followed it. The turn came up sharp between 2 scrub oaks, a faded sign half buried in dirt. The asphalt cracked under my tires, old and sun-baked, with patches of grass growing through. I expected it to reconnect to the main route within a few miles, but the GPS said I'd save 10 minutes, so I kept on. The road wound through low hills, no lights, no mailboxes, not even cattle fences. Just an endless stretch of dark brush and dirt. My headlights caught movement now and then. Maybe jackrabbits or stray dogs, but nothing stuck around long enough to see clearly. About 10 miles in, the GPS glitched again. The map froze, then rerouted, again pointing me down the same road, though the line had redrawn itself ahead, longer now, twisting deeper into nothing. The screen flickered like static on an old TV, and for a second I swore I saw something like fog forming inside the display. A faint outline of a bus shape, blurry and gray. Then it vanished and the voice calmly said, "Continue for 12 miles. It was getting late. The air outside looked strange, like the sky had gone from navy to flat black without any real sunset. The road narrowed to 1 lane, the paint long gone, the surface broken and uneven. The van's suspension rattled over each dip. Then the headlights caught something ahead. A large vehicle off to the right side, its shape hunched and rust-colored, half sunken into the earth. It took me a second to realize it was an old bus, the kind used decades ago with curved corners and riveted panels. The GPS suddenly froze again. The route stopped just short of the bus icon on the screen, the little arrow pulsing like it didn't know where to go next. I slowed down, curiosity winning over sense. The bus sat at an angle, 1 wheel buried. Windows fogged over from the inside even though the night air was bone dry. There was no sign of anyone. No lights, no engine noise. Nothing but the soft crackle of cicadas and the hum of my van idling. I pulled closer, illuminating the side. The paint had once been yellow, maybe a school bus, but it was bleached to gray and brown, rust eating through the panels. The door hung open an inch, and the metal frame around it was bent like something had forced it from inside. The strange thing was the windows. Every one of them clouded and dripping faintly from the inside like it was warm in there. My first thought was maybe someone was living in it, some drifter or addict sheltering off the road. But then I noticed the ground. There were no footprints, no tire marks, nothing at all leading to it. Just undisturbed dirt and brittle weeds. I turned the van off and got out, flashlight in hand. The air hit me like a wall, thick and humid out of nowhere, as if I'd stepped into a greenhouse. My skin prickled. I walked around the bus slowly, light tracing over the sides. Faded lettering showed through the rust. Jefferson County Schools. I was at least 100 miles from Jefferson County. The door creaked when I pushed it. The sound echoed in the stillness. A wave of warmth rolled out, mixed with the stale scent of metal and something faintly sweet like old perfume. My light caught dust floating through the air, but the beam didn't reach the back. The fog on the windows seemed thicker inside, beating and running down in slow rivulets. The floor was coated with what looked like melted plastic or hardened tar. I almost stepped in, but something about the silence stopped me. There was no sound of insects now. Even the wind had gone dead. I stepped back, heart beating faster. That's when I noticed the condensation shift. The nearest window had a streak drawn down the middle, like a finger had traced it from the inside. Then another beside it, then 3 more. I didn't wait to see if they formed a handprint. I turned back to the van and climbed in, locking the doors out of reflex. The GPS screen came alive again, glowing faintly, no longer showing the road. It was now displaying a static gray image of what looked like an empty bus interior. My stomach dropped. The picture flickered, but I could make out rows of seats, metal poles, and fogged glass. There was a faint outline near the back, too blurry to define. I reached forward and smacked the unit to reset it. The screen went black. I threw the van in reverse and backed up fast, tires crunching gravel. When I reached the main highway again, I pulled over to steady my breathing. The clock on the dash said 2:11 a.m. I'd only been gone about 30 minutes, but when I checked my phone, the signal was dead and the clock showed 4:36. My hands were shaking. I forced myself to keep driving until I hit a truck stop outside Monahan's, where the lights felt painfully bright after that stretch of dark. I sat in the parking lot with the engine running, trying to convince myself I'd just imagined it. Maybe it was heat exhaustion, maybe a bad GPS signal pulling some corrupted data from old maps. That's what I told myself. The next morning, I mentioned it to the mechanic at the depot, half laughing it off. He gave me a strange look and asked where exactly I'd gone. When I told him service RD 1137, he stopped smiling. He said there used to be a service road by that number back in the 70s, near an old refinery line that closed after an accident. A school bus had gone off the road one winter, caught fire with the kids still inside. The county sealed the road afterward, rerouted traffic, and the place was supposedly cleared decades ago. He said there shouldn't even be a turnoff anymore. I drove out that afternoon just to prove him wrong. But the place didn't exist. I must have passed the same stretch of highway 3 times. No sign, no break in the fence line, no trace of pavement. It was as if it had never been there. The GPS didn't recognize the route anymore either. It just froze whenever I tried to type the number in. A week later, I was cleaning out the van and found a faint smear on the inside of the rear window. 5 narrow streaks, fogged in an arc, like someone had pressed their hand there from the inside. I wiped them off, but they came back the next morning, faintly visible again when the glass fogged over with dew. I replaced the van the next month, but sometimes on certain nights I'll hear the GPS in my new one chirp to life on its own. It gives a soft notification tone and flashes a route suggestion, always the same one. 40 miles west, service route 1137, and I swear, even with the sound muted, I can still hear the faint hum of a bus engine somewhere in the static. It started as a routine review. After a long week of night shifts along Highway 385, Ethan McAllister sat in the dim break room of the Texas Department of Transportation's Alpine District office, coffee gone cold beside him, scrolling through dashcam footage from one of the work trucks. He had been assigned to check visibility conditions for the new batch of reflectors installed along a 12-mile stretch between Marathon and Sanderson, the kind that glint white in headlights like pinpricks in the dark. Normally, it was monotonous work. Note any fog interference, any signs of damage, check the timestamps, mark the spots. But around mile 8, something caught his eye. The dash cam showed the road as a gray ribbon under the work truck's lights, flanked by reflector posts standing like soldiers. Every 50 feet, another gleam. But when Ethan zoomed in, just for curiosity, he noticed that at each post there was a faint silhouette. A man-shaped figure standing perfectly still right beside every reflector. He thought at first it was a digital artifact or light distortion from the camera. But when he paused frame by frame, the outline was consistent. Tall, narrow shoulders, something like a head, something like a shadow that didn't belong to the truck or the worker in the shot. He leaned forward, rubbing his temples. It was probably compression noise or a bug in the feed, but it didn't move. Every reflector post, the same outline, for 12 miles. Ethan scrubbed through other parts of the footage, earlier sections, daylight recordings, Maintenance clips from the same route. Nothing strange there. Only this one night, Tuesday, between 2:18 and 2:37 a.m. The timestamp matched the night he remembered the guys talking about something weird near County Road 14. One of them had mentioned seeing shapes in the periphery while installing signs, laughing about ghosts in the reflectors. He rewound the tape again. The man's figure was hard to make out in the darkness, but the consistency unsettled him. He adjusted the brightness. The body shape became clearer, almost featureless, as if wearing something tight or smooth. There was no face, just a suggestion of one. Every post, every 50 feet, exactly the same distance, like a perfect repetition. He showed it to Hank, the oldest guy in the crew, who squinted and shook his head. Probably a glitch, he muttered, tapping his thermos. But I ain't driving that stretch at night. Never liked it. You know what's buried out there? Old flood victims. The county didn't move the graves when they rerouted the highway back in the 70s. There's a ditch near mile marker 91. You dig deep enough, you'll hit coffins. Ethan smirked, trying to brush it off. You telling me I'm watching ghosts stand by reflectors? Hank didn't answer. He just said, you ever notice how sometimes the reflectors face the wrong way in the morning? Like they've been turned. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The footage looped in his mind, those identical dark figures watching silently as the truck passed, frozen in place. Around midnight, he decided to drive out there himself, partly to reassure himself it was nothing, partly because he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The road was empty, a black ribbon through scrubland and low hills. The wind pressed against his truck and the reflectors gleamed faintly ahead. Every few seconds, the white flashes caught the corners of his eyes like distant eyes blinking. He slowed near mile 8, the same section from the footage. He stopped, got out, flashlight in hand. The cold hit him first, an unnatural, sudden. The desert nights were cool, sure, but this was different, like the air was sucked out of the world. The silence was so complete that his own breathing sounded intrusive. He walked toward one of the posts, shining the light on the ground. Fresh prints, human, barefoot, pressed into the gravel right next to the reflector. He followed the prints to the next post. Another set, identical size, same spacing. Then another. He counted 12, maybe 13 before stopping. His stomach twisted when he realized the prints weren't walking. They were facing the road, as if someone had stood still at each post, watching the highway, waiting. He turned off the flashlight for a moment to see how it looked under the headlights. The reflectors shimmered faintly, but there was something else. A darker space between the glows, shaped like a man. The beam of his truck lights wavered, catching movement. He turned the flashlight back on, but nothing was there now. He tried to laugh it off and walked back toward his truck. But when he reached the door, he heard a faint scraping sound, like dry feet dragging across gravel. He froze. The noise came from behind the posts, from the ditch line. Then came another sound, a low rasp, something close to a whisper but not quite words. He drove off, heart pounding, not daring to look in the mirrors. The next morning, he went back to the footage. He wanted to prove to himself that the mind plays tricks at night. But when he loaded the dash cam again, there was new data, a recording from last night. He hadn't turned the camera on, yet the file was there, time-stamped at 12:41 a.m., the exact time he'd stopped by mile 8. He clicked play. The footage showed his truck parked on the shoulder, headlights on. He was visible for a moment, stepping out with his flashlight. Then the feed flickered. The next frame showed him standing still beside the reflector, motionless. Seconds passed. The camera stayed focused on him, unmoving. But then something else appeared. Another silhouette stepping out from behind the post, tall, thin, standing beside him. Then another beside the next post and another. The whole line of reflectors filled with identical dark shapes. Each figure turned its head toward the truck in unison. The last thing on the tape was Ethan walking back toward the vehicle, unaware of what followed. The moment he reached the door, all the figures tilted their heads at once. He slammed the laptop shut, shaking. He checked the truck's memory unit, but the new file wasn't there. Only the copy he'd just seen. Over the next days, Ethan tried to talk himself out of it. Sleep deprivation, camera errors, overwork. But something about the road changed. More crews started reporting things. Lights flickering, tools misplaced. Strange figures seen at the periphery of work zones. One driver claimed he saw a face in his side mirror, pale, expressionless, right behind his seat, just before the image glitched into static. When Ethan finally confessed to his supervisor about the video, they dismissed it. The dashcams were scheduled for replacement anyway, but the next week the new crew chief called him, voice unsteady. "You didn't tell me about the guy," he said. "What guy?" "The one in the footage. He's still there. Every night. Looks like a person, but he doesn't move. We stopped near mile marker 90. I swear I saw him at 3 different posts. Same height, same stance. Every time we passed another reflector, there he was again." Ethan didn't answer. They pulled the dash cams again, checked the timestamps, ran the analysis. It didn't matter which truck or which night. Always between 2:15 and 2:40 a.m., always on that 12-mile stretch. Sometimes closer, sometimes further back, always watching. Months later, the district shut down that segment for safety concerns. They blamed soil instability and reflective malfunctions, but among the workers, they called it the mirror mile. Nobody volunteered for night duty anymore. The reflectors still shine bright and perfect, but if you stop on that road after dark, sometimes your headlights catch more than the posts. A figure standing by each one, perfectly still, waiting for the next driver to notice. And every now and then someone reports seeing something worse. When the lights hit just right, the figures blink. I never believed in premonitions until that night. My best friend Travis always dragged me into weird places whenever he got his hands on his camera, claiming he was building a portfolio for a photography scholarship. I didn't mind most of the time. Old barns, abandoned motels, forgotten cemeteries. But that night he wanted to check out the collapsed bridge on County Line Road. It was early September, still hot enough that the air clung to your skin. The road cut through a stretch of woods between 2 small Texas towns, Briar Hollow on one side, Caddo Creek on the other. Hardly anyone used it anymore since the bridge had been declared unsafe after a flood washed part of it away a few years back. We drove out there just before dusk, his old Ford rattling like a box of bolts. The smell of hot metal and cheap gas filled the cab, and the radio barely worked, fading in and out with bursts of static. The last song we caught before it died was House of the Rising Sun, and I remember thinking that was a weirdly fitting soundtrack for the kind of places we like to explore. When we reached the bridge, the road turned to cracked asphalt and then to packed dirt. The remains of the bridge jutted over a dry creek bed. Half the structure had collapsed into the mud below, leaving a jagged concrete edge like a broken tooth. The county had put up a chain-link barrier and some warning signs, but someone had cut a gap wide enough for people to slip through. Travis parked the truck and jumped out before I could even grab my flashlight. He was already climbing the fence, camera around his neck, sneakers crunching the gravel. The light was dimming fast, that weird orange-purple hue that happens just before night swallows everything. "Come on, man," he called back. "I want to get a few long exposure shots before it gets pitch black. The way the headlights hit the concrete looks awesome." I followed reluctantly. The place felt wrong right away. I could hear crickets and the occasional frog, but underneath that was something quieter, like a hum. Not mechanical, not electric, but deep and steady, like something alive breathing beneath the ground. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just my imagination. We made our way under the bridge, or what was left of it. The dirt smelled damp even though it hadn't rained in weeks, and the air was cooler down there. Travis set up his tripod and snapped a few test shots while I walked around with my flashlight, shining it across the concrete supports. The beam caught graffiti, names, hearts, crude drawings, but one section made me stop. There were 2 names carved into the concrete slab. Travis Hale and Evan Ross, my name. The letters were rough but clear, etched deep like someone had used a screwdriver or a knife. Underneath each name was a date, September 9th, 2025, 3 days from now. I stared at it for a long time before calling Travis over. He laughed when he saw it. "Dude, that's freaky," he said. "Probably just someone messing around. Maybe kids from school trying to scare whoever comes down here." But the carving looked fresh. The dust around it was pale and untouched, no signs of weathering. I ran my fingers over the grooves. They were sharp, like whoever had done it had carved it recently. "Let's go," I said. "This isn't funny." Travis rolled his eyes and started adjusting his camera again. "Relax, you're acting like it's some kind of omen. It's just a coincidence." The hum grew louder while he spoke, like it was responding to his voice. I could feel it through the soles of my shoes, vibrating in the dirt. The shadows under the bridge seemed thicker, heavier. My flashlight flickered and died. I smacked it against my palm a few times, but it stayed dark. That's when I noticed something on the opposite side of the creek bed. It was small at first, like a patch of darker darkness, but it moved. I thought maybe it was an animal until it straightened upright. My eyes adjusted enough to see a figure standing there, too still, too tall. Its outline shimmered slightly, like heat rising off asphalt. "Travis," I whispered. He didn't answer. I turned and saw him staring through the viewfinder, frozen. "What do you see?" I asked. He didn't move. Then the camera shutter clicked by itself. Once, twice, 3 times. The sound echoed strangely, like each click was further away than the last. The figure across the creek shifted closer, but it didn't walk. It just seemed to slide forward, the air rippling around it. I grabbed Travis's shoulder, and that snapped him out of it. "Let's go!" I yelled. We bolted for the truck, stumbling through the hole in the fence. I didn't dare look back. The humming had turned into a deep thrumming, almost deafening, as if the ground itself was alive. We sped back down County Line Road, neither of us speaking until we hit the paved highway again. Only then did Travis glance down at his camera. The display screen was cracked. He swore under his breath and tried turning it on, but the lens wouldn't retract. When we finally got back to town, he dropped me off at my place without saying a word. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying that moment in my head. The names, the dates, the sound, and the ground. The next day I tried calling him, but he didn't pick up. Same thing the following day. On the 3rd day, September 9th, his mom called me early in the morning. Her voice was shaking. Travis hadn't come home. They found his truck on County Line Road parked by the fence. The camera was on the passenger seat, still cracked. I drove out there before the police could stop me. The sun was just starting to rise. The air smelled like wet metal. The fence had been torn wider open, and the dirt under the bridge was disturbed, footprints leading down and back up again. Only one set. I went to the concrete slab where our names had been carved, and I swear to God they were gone. Not scratched out, not covered, just gone as if they'd never been there. In their place was a single sentence carved in the same rough style. One stayed. One ran. Both were chosen. I stumbled backward and tripped over something half buried in the dirt. It was Travis's camera. The screen flickered when I pressed the power button, and for a moment, it showed a photo taken from under the bridge. It was me, standing where he had been, flashlight in hand, staring across the creek. The date in the corner read September 9th, 2025, 11:47 p.m., hours from now. I dropped the camera and ran back to my car. As I sped away, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. The bridge was gone. Not collapsed, not buried, gone. The dirt path ended at a line of trees, no sign there had ever been a crossing. I didn't tell anyone what I saw. The cop said Travis must have slipped, fallen into the creek bed, maybe been washed away in one of those flash floods. They never found his body, but sometimes late at night I hear that same low hum coming through the ground outside my house. It vibrates the window panes and makes the pictures rattle. And last night, when I walked out to my driveway, there was a name carved into the concrete by the front tire of my car. It said Evan Ross. The date underneath is 3 days from now. It was close to 2 in the morning when I pulled off Interstate 20, somewhere west of Fort Stockton. The night had that dry, metallic stillness you only get out in West Texas. Air so thin it felt like sound couldn't travel. I'd been driving for almost 10 hours straight, the white lines on the asphalt starting to blur into one endless thread. When I saw the green rest stop sign glowing ahead, I took it without thinking. More for the promise of silence than for rest. The place sat a few hundred yards off the highway, a semicircle of cracked concrete with a handful of picnic tables, 2 vending machines, and a low brick restroom building that looked like it hadn't seen maintenance in years. One yellow streetlight buzzed above the lot, flickering just enough to make everything look half alive. I parked my truck under it and stepped out. That was when I saw her, a little girl, maybe 8 years old, curled up on top of one of the picnic tables like she'd fallen asleep waiting for someone. She had on a pink windbreaker and sneakers, one untied, her cheek pressed against her folded arms. For a moment I just froze, my brain trying to process the shape in front of me. It was too still to be an animal, too small to be an adult. When the wind picked up and lifted a strand of her hair, I felt my stomach tighten. I looked around instinctively, expecting to see headlights from a parked car, maybe a parent fumbling with a thermos. But the place was empty. Just my truck, the dim light, and the sound of wind hissing through mesquite bushes. I called out softly, "Hey, you okay?" No response. I walked closer, keeping my voice gentle like I'd talk to a skittish stray. "Hey, sweetheart, are you lost?" She stirred just enough to shift her head, eyes fluttering half open. Her voice came out dry and sleepy. My mom said to wait. I stopped a few feet away. "Okay," I said. "What's your name?" She didn't answer that. She just blinked at me, squinting like the light hurt. Something about her expression made me uneasy. Not scared exactly, but empty, like she wasn't fully awake or wasn't really there. I glanced around again, half expecting to see another car pulling in. Still nothing. I thought maybe her mom had gone to the restroom. I told the girl to stay put and jogged toward the building. The men's room door creaked when I pushed it open. Inside, the fluorescent light buzzed overhead, throwing cold light on the tiled floor. It was empty except for the smell of disinfectant and desert dust. I called out once, then stepped back outside. The women's restroom door was slightly ajar, so I knocked before peeking in. Nobody. But something on the bulletin board by the door caught my eye. There were 2 layers of flyers under the cracked plastic cover, one of those generic "report suspicious activity" posters, and beneath it, a newer one. It showed a missing child, a girl around 8 wearing a pink windbreaker, the same face I'd just seen on the picnic table. My breath caught in my throat. The details on the poster said she'd vanished from a rest stop off I-20 near Fort Stockton 3 years ago. Her name was Ella McKinney. My hands started to shake a little as I stepped back. On the wall next to the poster hung a small car seat, faded by the sun, and a tiny pink backpack, both zip-tied neatly to the railing as if part of some kind of roadside memorial. I turned around slowly, scanning the lot. The table where she'd been lying was empty. I ran toward it, my boots scraping against the concrete. The bench was bare. Only a small indentation on the dust-covered surface showed where someone, or something, had been lying a minute ago. I felt a drop of cold sweat run down my back. The air had changed, heavier now, like the temperature had dropped 10 degrees in seconds. I called her name even though I wasn't sure why. "Ella?" My voice echoed across the empty lot, swallowed by the desert. The bushes rustled, and somewhere behind the building I heard a faint creak like a door moving. I walked around the restroom, flashlight in hand. The wind picked up dust that stung my eyes. Behind the building was a small service shed with a rusted padlock hanging open. Its door stood slightly ajar, bumping against the frame in the wind. I pushed it open. Inside, my light fell on cleaning supplies, a broken vending machine, and in the far corner, a row of old highway maintenance signs. On the floor beneath them was a child's drawing, yellowed with time, a stick figure woman holding the hand of a small girl under a blue sky. At the bottom, in red crayon, it said "Me and Mommy." The paper looked old, years old, but the edges were freshly torn, as if someone had just dropped it there. When I stepped back outside, my truck lights were flashing. Both front doors were open. I ran to it, my heart hammering, half expecting someone to be sitting inside. But the cab was empty. The ignition was still off, keys dangling from the steering column. On the passenger seat lay a folded note, dirty and damp from the air. I unfolded it. Written in shaky block letters was a single line. "She's not lost. She's waiting." My hands went numb. I dropped the paper and scanned the lot again. The highway beyond it, a dark ribbon cutting through nothingness. Then I heard soft footsteps, bare feet padding lightly against gravel. I turned toward the sound. Ella was standing near the restrooms again, but not on the bench this time. She was facing the building, looking up at the missing person poster like she was reading it. I called out again, trying to keep my voice steady. "Ella, where's your mom?" She turned her head slowly toward me. Her eyes looked darker now, not just from the shadows. "She's coming," she said softly. I started to walk toward her, but my flashlight flickered and died. The only light left was the buzzing street lamp above, its glow fading in and out. The girl raised one hand and pointed toward the road leading back to the highway. I turned my head to follow her gesture and saw headlights approaching, bright and steady. Relief washed through me, thinking maybe another traveler had pulled in, someone I could flag down. But as the car drew closer, I realized something was off. The beams didn't move right. They didn't bounce or shift like a moving vehicle. They just glided perfectly smooth until they reached the edge of the lot and stopped dead. There was no sound of an engine. No tires crunching. Just silence and 2 white lights burning through the dark. Ella's voice was barely above a whisper. "That's her." I took a step back. "Your mom?" She nodded. Then she smiled faintly, and for a second I thought I saw tears on her cheeks. I looked back at the headlights, squinting, trying to see the car's shape. There wasn't one. Just the lights suspended above the ground like eyes. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, they blinked out. The darkness after was so thick it felt solid. When the streetlight flickered back to life a moment later, the girl was gone again. I didn't call out this time. I just stood there, breathing hard, staring at the spot where she'd been. My mind was scrambling for something rational. Sleep deprivation, hallucination. Maybe I'd nodded off behind the wheel, but the cold weight in my chest told me it wasn't that. I grabbed my keys and climbed into the truck, locking the doors out of instinct. The radio flickered on by itself, static filling the cab. Beneath the static was a faint rhythmic sound like a woman humming to a child. I shut it off. The hum kept going for a few seconds before fading into silence. I drove away without looking back, merging onto the empty highway. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep the truck steady. 10 miles later, when I finally pulled over to catch my breath, I noticed something on the passenger seat that hadn't been there before. A pink hair tie, small and faded, coiled like a little ring. I left it there. By morning, I convinced myself it had all been exhaustion and tricks of the mind. But a few weeks later, when I stopped at a diner near Alpine, I saw a local bulletin board with a familiar flyer. Same rest stop, same girl. But the date at the bottom was updated, missing since this summer. Someone had printed it again recently, and under it someone had scribbled in pen, "Still waiting." I started noticing the windmill sometime around late July, the kind of heat-dead season when the plains outside Marathon shimmer like oil and every fence post hums with cicadas. I'd been working at the Langford Ranch for just over 6 months then, a decent gig for a drifter like me. Fixing fences, feeding cattle, hauling hay, mindless work that left a man too tired to think, which suited me fine. My days ended with beer and dust, and that was about all I wanted. But that summer, something out there past mile 41 started to gnaw at the edges of my mind. The first time I saw it, I was coming back from repairing a water line near the far north fence, close to the old windbreak that hadn't been used since before I was born. The land rolls slow out there, a long stretch of mesquite and thorny brush that turns orange at sunset. I was on my four-wheeler, heading back toward the bunkhouse when I noticed movement out on the horizon, a dark silhouette turning against the dying light. A windmill spinning fast, the kind of tall skeletal structure that used to pump water from shallow wells back when cattle needed it, spread thin across the acres, except there weren't any active wells that far north. That part of the ranch was just scrubland now, fenced off and forgotten. I slowed the four-wheeler, squinting against the glare. The blades turned so quick they blurred, though the air was still, not a breath of wind. The dust hung in the heat, unmoving, like the whole desert had stopped to stare with me. I figured maybe it was some old rig catching thermal drafts, or maybe my eyes were tired from the sun. I remember wiping my face with my sleeve and glancing down for a second. When I looked back up, it was gone. Just open space again, flat as bone. That night, I mentioned it to Hank, the ranch foreman. He was an older guy with the leathery kind of face you only get from years under the Texas sun. He looked up from his plate long enough to frown. "Ain't nothing past mile 41 but dust and jackrabbits," he said. "Windmills got torn down years ago." Then he went back to his beans. I didn't push it. Out here, you learn not to question strange things too much. But after that day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The next week, I made excuses to drive the fence line again. Each time, the same thing happened. I'd spot the windmill from a distance, blades turning, the faint flicker of sunlight flashing off the metal like a signal. Then I'd blink or look away and it'd vanish. The strangest part was that it always showed up in the same direction, north-northwest, just past the section marker where the land dips into that old arroyo. One evening, I rode out there just to see for myself. I checked the maps in the office before I left. Nothing listed out there. No wells, no equipment, no old structures. But the closer I got, the more the air seemed to shift. Not windy exactly, just restless. The grass bent in different directions, like the ground itself was breathing. By the time I reached the arroyo, the sun was gone and the sky had gone that deep blue color before night really sets in. I shut off the engine and stood there listening. The silence was heavy, the kind that makes your heartbeat sound too loud. Then far off I heard it, a faint creak, slow and rhythmic. the unmistakable squeal of an old windmill turning. I tried to follow the sound on foot, walking through the brush. Every few yards, I'd stop and listen, trying to pin down where it was coming from. But the more I walked, the more it seemed to shift around me, first to the right, then behind, like it was moving when I wasn't looking. I finally stopped and turned in a full circle, scanning the horizon. And that's when I saw it again, clear as day. A tall iron windmill maybe half a mile out, the blades spinning so fast they blurred into a silver disc. I started toward it, pushing through the brush. But after maybe 50 yards, I lost sight of it again. The noise cut off mid-creek. The night settled back into silence. I turned on my flashlight and found nothing but dry grass and dirt. I told myself I was tired, maybe dehydrated. I went back to the four-wheeler and drove home. But from that night on, I started dreaming about it. I'd see the windmill spinning under a blood-red sky, the shadows of cattle standing still all around it, faces turned toward me but wrong somehow, stretched or twisted. In the dream, I'd walk closer and hear something beneath the spinning blades, a faint whimpering like an animal caught in the gears. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the sound still echoing in my ears. After about a week of those dreams, I decided I had to go back. Something in me needed to prove it was just an old piece of rusted equipment, nothing more. So one afternoon, I loaded the truck with some tools and drove out past the fence lines. I kept driving until the dirt road ended and the land turned rough. I parked and hiked the rest of the way. I must have walked 2 miles through brush and rock before I saw it again. This time, I got close enough to see the details. It was old. Iron frame, corroded blades, the kind you'd find abandoned on century-old ranches. The tail vane was broken and one of the legs looked warped, but the whole thing spun like it was caught in a storm. Only there was no wind. The air was still, heavy with that electric quiet that comes before a thunderclap. I stepped closer, feeling the ground under my boots vibrate faintly. That's when I noticed the dirt. Around the base of the windmill, the soil was dark, almost black, and the air smelled metallic like wet pennies. I crouched down and touched the ground. It was cold. Cold enough to sting my skin even in that blistering heat. I jerked my hand back and took a step away. The windmill groaned, turning faster, the sound rising until it was more like a moan than metal. And then it stopped. Just stopped. Every blade froze mid-turn. The silence after was thick, unreal. I stood there for what felt like minutes before I heard a sound that froze my blood. A voice. It was faint at first, carried low under the hum of the air. A woman's voice whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but it was close. Too close. I spun around, scanning the brush. Nothing. Then I heard it again, this time clearer. Help me. I took a step back, my pulse hammering. The sound was coming from beneath the windmill, from somewhere underground. I wanted to run, but some stupid part of me couldn't move. I knelt and pushed the grass aside, finding a small hatch set into the ground, half covered with rust and dirt. It looked old, older than the windmill itself. I hesitated, then grabbed the handle and pulled. The door groaned open, releasing a blast of cold air that smelled like earth and rot. A set of metal rungs led down into the dark. I should have left right then. Any sane man would have. But the whisper came again, trembling, desperate. Please, I climbed down. The ladder went maybe 15 feet before it opened into a narrow tunnel, lined with rotted boards. My flashlight beam cut through the dark, illuminating old machinery, pipes, and something that looked like a collapsed pump. The ground was slick with mud and water dripped from the ceiling. The air was colder down there, almost freezing. I followed the tunnel a few yards, my boots sinking into the muck. Then my light caught something ahead. A figure. A woman standing ankle-deep in the dark water, facing away from me. Her hair was long and wet, clinging to her back. I opened my mouth to speak, but before I could, she turned. Her face wasn't right. It was pale and bloated, her eyes black pits, her mouth opening and closing like she was trying to breathe. The whispering turned into a wet gurgle. I stumbled backward, nearly falling. My flashlight flickered, and in that split second of darkness, I heard the windmill start to turn again above us, the sound echoing down the shaft like thunder. When the light came back, she was gone. The tunnel was empty. The water around my boots was rippling hard like something had just moved through it. I turned and ran. I don't remember climbing out, but I remember the moment I broke into the sunlight again. The windmill was gone. The ground where it had stood was bare dirt, undisturbed. I drove back to the ranch and didn't say a word to anyone. But the next morning when I checked my truck, The tires were coated in that same black mud. And that night, the dreams came back worse. The woman's face clearer this time, her voice whispering my name. A week later, I told Hank I was quitting. He didn't ask why. Maybe he saw the look in my eyes and figured it was best not to. I packed up and left that same night. But as I drove down the county road, I glanced once in the rearview mirror. Far in the distance, silhouetted against the dying light, I saw it again. The windmill at mile 41, spinning fast, faster than any wind could turn it. And beneath the whirring sound, faint but unmistakable, was the echo of that same voice calling my name through the static of the desert air. The signal came in like a whisper through static, a thin ribbon of sound that wavered between white noise and something almost human. Eddie Cole leaned closer to the old shortwave set on the passenger seat, squinting at the dials like that might sharpen the reception. He'd been driving north on Route 385 for 3 hours, somewhere between Marathon and Fort Stockton. The highway black and endless under the desert sky. The only light came from his headlights and the faint red glow of the radio tuner, flickering as if the thing were alive. He twisted the knob again and caught it. A strain of music, faint but real. A few soft notes of what sounded like a country ballad. Then a voice, distant, muffled female. "You're listening to KRVN, the voice of West Texas." Eddie froze. KRVN hadn't broadcast in 40 years. His uncle used to talk about it when Eddie was a kid. An AM station out of Crane that got shut down in the late 70s after a fire destroyed the building. No one ever rebuilt it. Eddie had been chasing ghost signals for months, trying to build content for his online radio show called Dead Air Diaries, where he featured forgotten transmissions, abandoned frequencies, things that didn't exist anymore. But this was different. He grabbed his recorder, thumbed the red button and said, "Testing. This is Eddie Cole on Route 385, picking up a possible KRVN transmission at 2:14 a.m. Playback for record." He leaned back, smiling, adrenaline cutting through the fatigue. The voice came through again, clearer this time, slow and steady like it was being read live. "To the one listening, don't stop." Then static swallowed it whole. He thought it might be a skip signal, some atmospheric anomaly bouncing an old recording from hundreds of miles away. That happened sometimes during certain weather patterns. But the sky was clear, no storms, no lightning. Just the cold wind and the desert. He turned the volume higher and the sound grew jagged like the radio was fighting itself. There was music again, soft rhythmic guitar and old country waltz. And underneath it a faint tapping sound. He adjusted the antenna, leaning across the seat, and that's when the engine cut out. No warning. The dashboard went dark. The hum of the tires faded into silence and the headlights blinked out, leaving him stranded in total blackness. The only thing left alive was the radio. Its glow deepened to a bloody orange as the static turned to a deep hum that made the air vibrate. Eddie's pulse spiked. He tried the ignition, but it just clicked. Nothing. He checked his phone, no signal. Just emergency calls only. He stared through the windshield at the dark highway, and for a moment he thought he saw movement out there. A faint shape by the roadside, maybe 50 yards ahead. Tall, still, watching. Then the radio popped and hissed, and the voice came back. "Don't look away." He didn't remember deciding to get out, but he was suddenly standing beside his car, the desert air sharp and dry in his throat. The silence out there wasn't normal. Even in West Texas, you could usually hear the wind or the chirp of insects, the faint hum of the world turning. But out here there was nothing. Not even the sound of his own breathing seemed right. It came out shallow and muffled, as if the air was too heavy to carry it. The shape on the road looked clearer now. A person, maybe a woman. Her dress, pale in the darkness, moved slightly as if touched by a breeze that didn't exist. Eddie started walking toward her, slow steps crunching on gravel. "Hey," he called. "You okay?" No response. Just that faint swaying side to side. He got closer and realized she wasn't standing on the asphalt. She was hovering just above it, her feet a few inches off the ground. The hem of her dress flickered like static. Then her face turned toward him. Not moved. Turned like a photograph flipping from one frame to another. The eyes were hollow, empty sockets filled with gray noise like old TV snow. Eddie stumbled back, heart slamming. The radio inside his car screamed with feedback, a sharp digital shriek that made his ears ring. He ran for the door, slammed it shut and locked it. The figure was gone. Just blackness. He sat there shaking, hands gripping the wheel. the dead engine clicking softly as it cooled. Then the radio clicked again and started to play music. Same song as before, clearer now. A woman singing soft and sweet with an old vinyl crackle underneath. He recognized it. Where the Dust Settles, by Marla Dean, 1973. A local country singer who died in that same fire that destroyed KRVN. Eddie stared at the radio as her voice filled the car. And then, just under the music, he heard his own voice. The one from the recording he'd made minutes earlier. "Testing, this is Eddie Cole on Route 385. It repeated, louder each time. "Testing, this is Eddie Cole." Until the words distorted into static and the car filled with a metallic screech that made him clutch his head. When it stopped, the screen on his recorder glowed faintly. The timer was running, even though he hadn't pressed record again. He picked it up, hand trembling, and saw the timestamp, 2:19 a.m. Then the text on the small digital screen flickered. "New transmission received. Playback?" He pressed yes. There was breathing at first. Deep, ragged breathing, like someone holding the mic close to their mouth. Then a man's voice, hoarse, half whispering. "Eddie, can you hear me?" His throat went dry. "Who is this?" He whispered, no answer. Just a faint clicking sound, steady and rhythmic, like someone tapping metal against glass. Then the voice came again, weaker. "You shouldn't have answered her." Static. Then silence. Eddie looked out the window. The road stretched empty in both directions. But far down, maybe 100 yards away, a red light blinked. Then another, like taillights. Someone else out there? He started the car again on instinct, but the key turned uselessly. The radio crackled. "You're listening to KRVN, where the night never ends." The voice was cheerful, chipper, exactly like old broadcasts used to sound. And then beneath it, a soft hum started, low and mechanical. The headlights flickered on by themselves. The radio's orange glow spread across the dashboard until every dial and surface gleamed red. The hum deepened into a roar that made the windows vibrate. Eddie grabbed the door handle, but it wouldn't move. The locks clicked down on their own. The seatbelt tightened across his chest, pinning him to the seat. He screamed for help, but the sound was drowned by the radio as the music grew louder. That same looping waltz, cheerful and wrong, repeating the same verse over and over. He could see movement in the windshield reflection now. The woman was standing beside the car, her head tilted as if she were listening through the glass. Then she leaned in close until her face was pressed against it, the static of her features flickering with each note. Her lips moved in sync with the song, but no sound came out of them. Only the radio sang. The smell of burning vinyl filled the air. The car engine roared to life on its own, gears grinding. The tires squealed against the asphalt, spinning in place. Smoke filled the cabin, acrid and black, as the car started moving forward without his foot on the pedal. The woman's reflection moved with it, her shape stretching across the windshield like a shadow painted in static. Eddie clawed at the seatbelt, tearing at the strap until it gave way, throwing him sideways against the door. It burst open. He hit the ground hard and rolled into the gravel, coughing. When he looked up, the car was gone. Only the faint echo of that song remained, fading down the road. He scrambled to his feet, stumbling toward the shoulder where an old metal sign leaned against the post. It was rusted, but still readable. Karn Radio Tower, private property. The arrow pointed east into the desert. He looked out that way and saw faint lights in the distance, blinking like beacons. He should have left, but something about the sound drew him. The faint music floating on the dry wind. He walked for what felt like an hour, guided by the lights. They grew brighter, flickering orange and red. Finally, he reached a chain-link fence half buried in sand. Beyond it stood a skeletal tower, its frame warped and blackened by age. At its base was a small concrete building with broken windows. The door hung half open, moving slightly in a wind he couldn't feel. The sign above it still read KRVN. He stepped inside. Dust and burnt paper covered the floor. The air smelled of smoke and rust. The broadcast console was still there, melted and fused, but the red on-air light was glowing faintly. He stared at it, heart pounding. Then he heard her again. The same voice that had said, "Don't stop." It was coming from the single working speaker on the console. "You made it," she whispered. "We've been waiting." Then the static burst into laughter, human and mechanical at once, and the room lit up with red light. His recorder fell from his hand, the screen flashing rapidly. It showed the same text again and again. "Live transmission active. Call sign, Eddie Cole." The next morning, a state trooper found Eddie's car on the shoulder of Route 385. Engine cold, door open, radio dead. The only thing running was the recorder on the seat, still playing static with the faint sound of a woman's song underneath. The trooper turned it off, but when he got back in his cruiser, the same melody came through his own radio. Just for a second. Then silence. The desert road stretched straight ahead, a pale ribbon under a sky the color of steel. Miles behind me, the sun had vanished behind the jagged edge of the mountains, and the world had turned to cold shadow. I had been driving since early afternoon, heading from El Paso toward a nowhere kind of town where I was supposed to meet a guy about a used truck part. The map showed a thin gray line through the desert. No towns for nearly 100 miles, just the occasional rest stop and the occasional flicker of radio static that passed for company. The car's headlights carved 2 narrow tunnels through the dark, and everything beyond them seemed to dissolve into sand and night. I remember glancing at the fuel gauge and realizing it was lower than I'd thought. That kind of drop that sneaks up on you. The last sign I'd passed said next service is 47 miles, and I had just enough gas to make it if I didn't mess around. I was starting to feel that tight knot of unease that comes from being completely alone in a place that doesn't care if you live or die. Somewhere past mile marker 212, I saw it. A green reflective sign up ahead on the right side of the road, the kind the highway department puts out to mark small towns or junctions. It was clean and new-looking, standing straight and bright under the high beams. I slowed down a little as I passed it, mostly because it didn't make sense to see something that new out there. The sign said in clean white letters, "Welcome to Hollister Ridge Population 1. I frowned and kept driving. There was no Hollister Ridge anywhere on my GPS. I tried saying it out loud to the map app, but it returned nothing. No such place. The thing that bothered me was how the sign looked. New paint, straight post, reflective coating still bright like it had just been installed. I hadn't seen a single sign for the past 20 miles that wasn't riddled with bullet holes or sandblasted to hell. I checked the rearview mirror as the sign faded into the dark behind me, and that's when I noticed it. The number wasn't 1 anymore. The reflective paint caught my headlights and showed a different word, faint but clear, population 2. For a second, I thought it was a trick of light, maybe the beam glancing off a dent or a smear of dust. I blinked and looked again, and I could swear it said 2. I almost stopped, but something deep in my gut told me not to. Just keep going. The highway stretched ahead like a narrow scar. The radio hissed and clicked as I turned the knob, but every channel was nothing but static. Then faintly a voice bled through. AM frequency, low and scratchy, a man's voice reading something. I could only catch fragments. Population confirmed. Arrival acknowledged. The rest drowned under the static. I turned it off. The silence afterward felt heavier than before. About 20 minutes later, I saw lights in the distance. Not headlights, stationary ones. They flickered low and warm, like the glow of old sodium lamps. The kind that hang over rural intersections or gas stations that haven't been updated since the 70s. Relief washed over me. Maybe I'd hit a service station or a town after all, but the map was still blank. No name, no marker, just empty desert. The closer I got, the stranger it looked. A single gas station stood at the crossroad, its sign half lit, reading Hollister Ridge Filling Co. The H had burned out. The building looked old but not abandoned. The lights inside were on, and a faint buzzing neon sign in the window said open. A single pump stood in front, the kind with rolling numbers instead of digital ones. I pulled in, and the moment I turned off the engine, the night closed around me like a thick blanket. The air was utterly still. No wind, no bugs, no hum of distant traffic, just the quiet click of the cooling engine. Inside, a bell chimed as I opened the door. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, flickering slightly. A man stood behind the counter, tall, pale, wearing a gray shirt with a name tag that had long since faded unreadable. He looked up when I came in. His eyes were gray, too. "Evening," he said in a slow, dry voice. "You're new." "Guess so," I said, forcing a laugh. "Didn't even know this place was out here. Saw your sign a few miles back. Population 1, huh?" He smiled faintly. "Not anymore." Something about the way he said it made my skin crawl. "I just need to fill up," I said quickly. "Pump still work?" He nodded. "Everything works here." I went back outside, trying not to think about the way his eyes followed me. I filled the tank, but as I watched the numbers turn on the old pump, I realized they weren't adding up right. They spun too fast, counting gallons quicker than the nozzle could possibly deliver. Then they froze right at 666. I shut it off and went back inside, ready to pay and leave. The man was gone. The store was empty, but I could hear something faint coming from behind the counter, like the whisper of a radio. I leaned closer. It was that same voice from before, the one on the AM channel. Population confirmed, it said. Resident 2 acknowledged. Awaiting departure of 1. I stepped back, heart hammering. The bell above the door chimed again, but I hadn't touched it. The air felt suddenly colder. Outside, the pump hose was swinging gently, as if someone had just brushed past it. I looked around, but the desert was empty. Then I saw something down the road, a figure standing by the highway sign I'd passed earlier. Too far to make out clearly, but tall, unmoving. I blinked and it was gone. I got in the car, locked the doors, and started the engine. The radio came on by itself, full of static, and through it I heard that voice again. Population adjusted. The lights of the gas station went out all at once. Pitch black. My headlights flickered and died. The only thing visible was the faint green glow of the dashboard. I slammed the gear into drive and hit the gas, but the tires spun like I was on slick pavement. The car jerked and then caught, lurching forward. The darkness fell behind me. After maybe 10 minutes of driving, I glanced in the rearview mirror. The road was empty, but the sign was still visible in the distance, glowing faintly under the moonlight. I squinted, trying to make out the number. Population 1, relief started to settle, until I realized the sign wasn't fading behind me. It was staying exactly the same distance away, like I was moving, but it wasn't. My stomach twisted. I hit the accelerator harder. The needle climbed, but the scenery didn't change. The same stretch of desert, the same faint silhouette of the mountains, the same damn sign behind me. Then I caught movement in the backseat mirror. Something dark, sitting perfectly still in the shadows behind me. For a heartbeat, I thought it was just my jacket or a trick of light. Then it moved, slowly upright. A hand rested on the back of the passenger seat, pale and thin. I swerved, the car jerking across the road. I didn't dare turn around. The mirror showed enough. A figure sat there, featureless in the dark except for its eyes, which glowed faintly like the reflective paint on the sign. It tilted its head slightly, watching me. The radio hissed again. Population confirmed, the voice whispered. Resident 1 remains. I don't remember much after that. Just the scream of tires, a blinding flash of green, and then silence. When I came to, the car was parked neatly at the side of the road. Morning light was spilling over the horizon. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. The seat behind me was empty. I climbed out, breathing hard, and looked down the highway. The sign was still there, gleaming in the sunrise. Welcome to Hollister Ridge Population 1. I turned to leave, but something made me glance back one more time. The sun caught the edge of the paint, and the number flickered just slightly, like it was still wet. Then for just a moment I saw it change. Population 2, and this time it stayed that way. By the time the rear tire blew, the sky over Highway 90 was turning that strange copper color that only happens right before dusk. The woman's name was Laura, and she was about 20 miles west of Uvalde, headed home from visiting her sister in Del Rio. She'd been driving since noon, her car stuffed with laundry leftovers, and the half-finished birthday cake her nephew insisted she take. She was tired but calm, humming along with an old country station that kept cutting in and out. When the tire went, it sounded like a gunshot, sharp and final. The car jerked sideways, thudded into the shoulder, and settled on the gravel with a hiss that reminded her of a snake. She swore under her breath, heart pounding as she guided it to a stop near a faded green sign that read, "Devil's Cutoff, 1 mile." There wasn't much else around, just the desert, flat and brittle, stretching out on both sides, and the faint hum of crickets beginning their nightly chorus. She'd driven this route plenty of times, but she didn't remember ever seeing that sign before. Maybe she'd just never noticed it. The name stuck with her, though. Devil's Cutoff. It sounded like something out of a bad campfire story. She killed the engine, pulled the emergency brake, and stepped out. The heat was fading, but still clung to the asphalt like a fever. She checked her phone, no service, of course. She opened the trunk, pulled out the spare, and crouched beside the car. She wasn't great at changing tires, but her ex had taught her once, years ago, when they were stranded outside Kerrville. She remembered his voice telling her, "Always loosen the nuts before you jack it up or you'll regret it." So she did, one by one, her knuckles scraping against metal. The air felt heavier by the minute, the smell of dust thick and dry. Somewhere far off, a coyote barked. She was almost done when the low rumble of an engine rolled across the stillness. She froze, wiping sweat from her forehead. Headlights appeared in the mirror of her side door, two white eyes cutting through the dusk. Relief came first. Maybe someone would stop and help. But then the car drew closer and Laura's chest went tight. It wasn't just any car. It was her car. The same make, same faded blue color, same dent on the passenger door from when she'd backed into a pole last year. The license plate even had the same combination of letters. But her car was right here, jacked up on the shoulder, missing a wheel. The other car slowed as it passed, and she saw a woman behind the wheel. Her, or someone who looked exactly like her. The same hair tied back, the same sunglasses resting on top of her head, the same white t-shirt she was wearing now. The other Laura turned her head slightly as she went by, and in that split second their eyes met. It wasn't a reflection. It wasn't a trick of light. The other her smiled, slow and strange, and kept driving, taillights fading into the desert road until they were gone. Laura stumbled backward, nearly dropping the wrench. Her breath came shallow, her body shaking so hard she could feel her pulse in her teeth. She spun around, half expecting to see someone filming her. Maybe a prank, maybe a mirror truck or something ridiculous. But there was nothing. Just the empty road, the rust-colored sky, and her own car sitting silent and wounded. She told herself it was exhaustion, maybe the heat playing tricks on her. She'd read about that before. Mirages, road fatigue, sensory distortion. She sat back on the gravel, trying to steady her hands, but the air felt wrong now. Charged like just before lightning. The sound of the crickets had stopped. Even the wind had gone still. Then she heard the car again, faint at first, then louder, like it had looped around. She turned toward the road, and sure enough, the same car appeared over the rise, headlights steady. It was coming back. She stood quickly, stepping away from her car, heart hammering. The twin vehicle slowed as it approached, and this time it pulled onto the shoulder across from her. The engine idled, a deep, steady growl. Through the windshield, she could see the outline of herself sitting motionless behind the wheel. The windows were tinted darker now, but she could still make out her face, or at least the shape of it, staring straight ahead, not moving, not blinking. "Hey," she shouted, though her voice came out hoarse. "What the hell is this?" The figure didn't respond. Laura took a hesitant step closer, and the twin car's headlights flicked once, like a signal. Then the passenger window rolled down halfway with a soft electric hum. The air that came from inside smelled of something old and metallic, like rain on rust. She heard faint static like a radio between stations. Then a voice, low and distant, came through the open window. "Get in." It wasn't her voice. Not exactly. It was slower, deeper, worn around the edges, but it was close enough to make her skin crawl. She stumbled backward, shaking her head. "No," she said, though her own voice sounded like it belonged to someone else now. The window rolled back up. The figure inside turned its head just slightly, the way she did when checking her mirrors. The car idled a moment longer, then eased back onto the road, disappearing again into the purple horizon. She wanted to believe she'd imagined it all, that maybe she was dehydrated or hallucinating. But then she looked down and saw the wrench lying in the dirt, perfectly parallel to a fresh set of tire tracks, identical to her own. She forced herself to finish changing the tire, her hands trembling so badly it took twice as long as it should have. She could feel the night closing in, shadows pooling under the car, shapes shifting in the fading light. When she finally got back in the driver's seat, she locked the doors and sat for a long time without turning the key. The radio crackled faintly, though she hadn't switched it on. A whisper of static filled the car, and then through it her own voice, recorded, distorted, spoke one word. "Now." She started the engine, desperate to get out of there. The tires kicked up gravel as she sped down the road, passing the sign for Devil's Cutoff again. But something was off. The road curved when it shouldn't have. The distance markers were wrong. Every few miles she'd pass the same patch of scrub, the same faded billboard advertising a rest stop that never appeared. She drove faster, but the odometer didn't seem to move. The desert outside grew darker, the sky heavier. She tried to call her sister again, still no signal. When she looked down at the phone, the home screen flickered for a moment, showing her reflection instead of the icons. Only her reflection didn't move when she did. It just stared back, smiling faintly. By the time she reached what looked like a junction, her hands were slick with sweat. The green sign ahead read, "Devil's Cutoff 1 mile." Again. She slammed the brakes, skidding to a stop. It wasn't possible. She'd been driving straight. She got out of the car, stepping into the humid dark. Somewhere out there, an engine purred softly. She turned, scanning the horizon, and there it was. The twin car idling a few hundred feet behind her, headlights burning white through the night. The driver's door opened and the figure stepped out. Even from that distance, she could tell it was her. Same jeans, same shirt, same everything. The double raised a hand as if in greeting. Then she started walking toward Laura, slow and steady. Laura jumped back into her car, fumbling with the keys. The other her broke into a run, footsteps crunching gravel. The headlights flashed once, blinding her. When her vision cleared, the figure was gone. The desert was silent again, except for the sound of her own rapid breathing. She slammed the car into gear and took off toward the east, refusing to look back. She drove until the sun came up, though she never saw another car, another sign, or even a town. When she finally spotted the lights of Uvalde in the distance, she almost cried from relief. She pulled into the first gas station she saw, parked crooked, and stumbled inside. The man behind the counter looked up, startled by her appearance. "Ma'am, you all right?" he asked. I had a flat out by Devil's Cutoff," she said, her voice shaking. "There was someone on the road. Looked like me." "Drove my car," the man frowned. "Devil's Cutoff?" He scratched his chin. "Ain't no road by that name." "Not around here." She turned toward the glass door, heart racing again. Outside, her car sat under the neon lights. Dusty, dented, normal. But there was a smear of handprint on the driver's window. She hadn't touched it. The fingers were long, thin, pressed in from the inside. Later, when she tried to drive home again, she found the same stretch of highway waiting for her, the same mile marker, the same green sign appearing just where it always did. Devil's Cutoff, 1 mile. No matter which direction she went, the road bent her back toward it. Sometimes she'd see the other car in her mirrors, matching her speed, always a mile behind. Sometimes she'd hear her own voice whispering faintly through the static, telling her to pull over. And sometimes when she passed by a reflective surface, she'd catch sight of herself. Only this time the version in the glass didn't look scared at all. It looked patient, like it was just waiting for her to stop and switch places. Late one evening in early August, Sheriff Dale Mercer sat alone in the Brewster County Dispatch office, the hum of the ceiling fan doing little to fight the heavy desert heat. The radios crackled now and then, mostly static and the occasional CB chatter from long-haul truckers crossing I-10. It was routine, the kind of night he'd had 100 times before, until the call came in from mile marker 132, same as it did every summer, always between July and August, always just after midnight. The voice on the other end was calm at first, male, mid-30s by the sound of it. "This is Jason," he said. "My car broke down outside Alpine near the mile marker. I need a tow and my wife's starting to panic." Dale froze. The name Jason Holloway was one he hadn't heard in a long time. He remembered it from an old missing persons report from 2009. Jason and Rebecca Holloway, honeymooners from San Antonio, last seen leaving the Desert Skies Motel heading east. Their car had been found days later, empty, doors open, both of their phones sitting on the dashboard, dead from the heat. The case had gone cold, but every few years someone, some voice, would call from that stretch of road claiming to be them. Dale picked up the receiver and pressed the red button to trace the call, but the line showed nothing. No origin, no ping. "Jason," he said slowly, "what kind of car are you driving?" The voice on the other end hesitated, then replied, "A blue Ford Focus, you can't miss it. We're right past a little rise, maybe a mile after the sign for Alpine." Dale swallowed hard. That was exactly what the report had said 15 years ago. He tried to stall him, asking if anyone was hurt. But the man started to sound confused, like someone waking up from a deep sleep. "You're the first to answer," he murmured. "We've been calling all night. I thought maybe the lines were down." Dale's hand trembled as he reached for the radio. "Unit 4, this is dispatch," he said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Can you swing by mile marker 132 eastbound side? Check for a stranded vehicle." The deputy on duty, young kid named Torres, acknowledged and headed out. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Dale kept the line open, listening to Jason breathe on the other end, faint wind pushing through the receiver. "Can you stay on the line?" Dale asked. "Help's coming." Jason didn't answer right away. Then came the sound of someone whispering behind him, a woman's voice, sharp and frightened. "Tell him to hurry. They're coming back." The call dropped. Dale sat in the dead silence of the room, the hum of the fan suddenly louder than before. The line read disconnected, no number, no signal source. When Torres finally radioed back, he said there was nothing there. No car, no tire marks, no sign anyone had ever been there at all. Just the mile marker sign swaying slightly in the wind. By morning, Dale tried to convince himself it was a prank. Small towns breed them. College kids from Solros, bored and drunk, messing with the sheriff. But when he checked the call logs, the line was blank. It hadn't even registered as an incoming call. The same thing had happened in 2012, 2015, 2018, each time a year divisible by 3, each time between late July and early August. Always a driver, always at that same marker, always someone reported missing years ago. There had been a woman once too, a nurse from Lubbock, who disappeared on a cross-country drive in 1997. Her name had come up during a similar call in 2006. She'd been crying, saying she saw lights in the desert that wouldn't stop following her. Over the next few days, Dale tried to brush it off, but it clung to him like dust. He started driving that stretch every evening, just to see it for himself. The road out past Alpine was long and empty, flanked by creosote and scrub grass, mountains shadowed in the distance. The mile marker itself stood near a low gully where the land dipped down, creating a mirage-like shimmer during the day. Locals said you could see ghosts out there if you looked too long, but that's what people in desert towns always said about lonely places. On the fourth night, around midnight, Dale parked by the shoulder and turned off the engine. The only sounds were the wind and the faint buzz of insects. Then his radio hissed to life. "Dispatch, this is Unit 4. Dale grabbed it. "Go ahead, Torres." But it wasn't Torres's voice. It was the same man from the call. "Sheriff, I can see your car," the voice said softly. "But you're not supposed to be here yet." Dale's stomach nodded.
"Jason?"
he whispered. "Where are you?" The voice came again, distant now, as though drifting through layers of static. "We keep trying to leave, but every road leads back here." The radio cut off, replaced by the faint sound of tires crunching gravel somewhere behind him. He spun around, flashlight in hand, but there was nothing but open desert. The beam swept across the mile marker sign, faded and rusted. Then something moved behind it. A figure, just a shape, pale and thin, retreating into the dark. Dale shouted, started toward it, but the sound of footsteps stopped. The wind went dead still. When he reached the sign, he found something carved into the metal post. It was a date, August 3rd, 2024, 3 days from now. Back at the office, he didn't tell anyone. He barely slept. He found himself replaying the recordings from the dispatch system. Though they were useless, all he got was static. Then on the night of August 3rd, just after midnight, the call came again. Same numberless line, same stretch of road. Only this time the voice wasn't Jason, it was Rebecca. "He's gone," she said. They took him into the lights. Dale could hear her crying softly, her breath catching. "I can see them now too. They're on the road." He tried to keep her talking, asking what she meant, what lights, but she kept whispering something over and over like a prayer. "They want someone else now, someone to take our place." Then the call ended. He radioed Torres again, but the kid didn't answer. After 10 minutes, Dale got in his cruiser and drove out himself. The desert was black and silent. The stars dimmed behind a layer of thin clouds. As he neared mile marker 132, he saw a faint light ahead. Headlights flickering like a car stuck with its hazards on. He slowed down, pulling to the shoulder. A blue Ford Focus sat in the same place it had been found 15 years earlier, dusted with sand but looking fresh, almost new. Both doors were open. He stepped out cautiously, hand on his holster, and called out, "Jason? Rebecca?" No answer. The only thing he could hear was the wind starting up again, rising with a low hum that almost sounded like voices. He walked to the driver's side door and saw a phone on the seat. Screen lit, call in progress. The display read dispatch connected. For a long second, he couldn't breathe. Then the phone speaker crackled and his own voice came through, clear and calm. "Dispatch, what kind of car are you driving?" It was his voice from the first call. He dropped the phone and stumbled back, tripping over the gravel. The lights flickered once and went out. The entire road went dark. He climbed into his cruiser, slammed the door, and started the engine, but his radio was dead. Even his headlights wouldn't come on. The desert was utterly silent except for a soft whisper outside his window, like someone pressing their mouth to the glass. "You're the first to answer," it said. "We've been calling all night." When they found his car the next morning, it was parked exactly at mile marker 132, doors locked, keys in the ignition. No sign of Dale Mercer anywhere. The dispatch logs from that night were blank, except for one entry, an incoming call at 12:11 a.m. The recorded message lasted 15 seconds and contained a single voice repeating the same phrase over and over until the tape ran out. "This is Sheriff Mercer. My car broke down outside Alpine. I need a tow and my wife's starting to panic." It was just after dawn when they found the truck, a white Peterbilt idling by the side of Highway 90, a few miles east of Van Horn. The engine was still running steady as if it had been left there only moments ago. But there was no driver, no signs of struggle, no blood, and no tracks in the dirt beyond the tire marks that had curved gently onto the shoulder and stopped. Deputy Harris was the first on scene. He'd gotten the call from a rancher who'd spotted the rig through the early fog while checking fence lines. Harris said later that when he approached the cab, he expected to see someone slumped over the wheel, maybe asleep, maybe dead. Instead, the seat was empty, the driver's door half open, and the only sound was the low, rhythmic rumble of the diesel engine and the faint squeal of the cooling belts. There was a thermos still upright in the cup holder, steam long gone, and a styrofoam coffee cup on the dash with a lipstick mark on the rim. The radio was tuned to static. The glove box was locked, but on the passenger seat sat a worn leather logbook, open to the last page. The handwriting was neat, all caps, each entry dated and signed, except for the final one. The last delivery was listed as Fort Stockton Depot, with the date entered as 06/14/2043. That was 18 years from now. At first, they thought it had to be a prank. Maybe some trucker having fun, leaving a spooky note to freak out whoever found it. But the rest of the entries were too consistent. The miles, times, routes, weather notes, all detailed, all realistic. The handwriting matched perfectly throughout the book. No forgeries, no switches in pen style. Every entry corresponded with actual deliveries logged in the Texas Freight Registry for the past 6 months. Whoever this driver was, he'd been real. The truck's plate was registered to a company called Sand Creek Logistics out of Lubbock. Harris called them, expecting to get an explanation. But the woman on the other end told him something that made his stomach drop. Sand Creek had gone out of business in 1999. Their last truck was sold at auction in 2001. She couldn't recall the serial number, but she said if it was one of theirs, it should have been scrapped years ago. Harris gave her the VIN, read it twice to be sure. There was a long silence, and then she hung up. When I got the case file, I was working as a private investigator for the Texas Department of Transportation. My job was usually fraud, stolen vehicles, or illegal hauling. Nothing supernatural. But something about the Van Horn truck kept getting passed around law enforcement circles like a ghost story, and I wanted to see for myself what was fact and what was folklore. The logbook had been locked up in evidence storage in El Paso. When I finally got clearance to review it, I expected some fake yellowed pages, a bored trucker's prank. Instead, I found the same thing Harris had described. Each page was perfectly ordinary until you reached the last week's entries. The handwriting was still steady, but the details started to get strange. The mileage stopped increasing correctly. One line noted refuel, pump shows 0.0 gallons dispensed, tank full. Another said, no contact with dispatch, channel silent, sky darker than usual, air feels heavier. Then the last line, dated in that far-off year, arrival ETA 0213. They are waiting by the fence line. Do not stop. The phrase, they are waiting by the fence line, lodged itself in my head. When I drove down to Van Horn to retrace the route, I found long stretches of flatland dotted with mesquite and wire fences that seemed to run forever in both directions. There were moments when I'd look out the window and swear I saw movement out there. Shadows that shifted just beyond the posts. Figures that didn't move like people. I told myself it was just heat shimmer. The desert plays tricks on tired eyes, especially near midday. I stopped at the spot where the truck had been found. There was no trace of it anymore, just gravel and a patch of flattened grass where the tires had rested. But when I stepped out, the air felt unnaturally still. No wind, no birds. Even the hum of the highway sounded distant, like it was being swallowed by the landscape. I don't scare easy, but something about that silence made me uneasy. I drove into Van Horn proper and found the old gas station the deputy had used as a staging point. The owner remembered the case, said the truck had drawn a small crowd before the sheriff's office hauled it off. He told me something that wasn't in the report. When the tow truck hooked up the semi, the radio inside turned on by itself. It played a man's voice reading coordinates in a slow, mechanical tone, repeating them over and over. Then it cut out. They later tried to trace those coordinates, but they didn't match any known route, just a blank patch of land north of Marathon, near a series of abandoned oil wells. The owner said the sound had made the hairs on his neck stand up. He'd worked that station for 30 years and never heard a voice like that. Too flat, too empty, like someone talking from inside a tunnel. The next day I drove out toward Marathon. The landscape grew lonelier, the radio fading into static somewhere around mile marker 63. I passed a few rusted mailboxes, a burned-out trailer, and then nothing but desert scrub and fence line. Around dusk, I saw something reflective up ahead. For a second, I thought it was another truck's chrome grille catching the last of the sunlight. But as I drew closer, I realized it was a road sign. Someone had scrawled the numbers 2043 on it in faded black paint. Beneath it, a small sticker read Sand Creek Logistics. I pulled over, heart thudding. The sticker was new, barely weathered. Someone had been here recently. Or maybe recently wasn't the right word. I left the car running and stepped out, gravel crunching under my boots. The air smelled faintly metallic, like the aftermath of a lightning strike. I followed the fence line for about 100 yards, my flashlight cutting through the dim. That's when I saw them. Old tire tracks leading through the gate into the desert. They weren't fresh, but they hadn't been there long enough to fade. The gate itself hung open, the chain twisted like it had been forced. I thought about turning back, but something in me needed to know. I walked another 50 yards until the ground began to slope downward. That's where I found the clearing. There in the middle of the dirt basin sat a semi-truck cab half buried in dust. Same model, same paint. The logo on the door was faint but legible. Sand Creek Logistics. The windows were blacked with grime, but when I wiped a corner clean, I saw movement inside. Not fast, not human, just a slow, shivering distortion like heat mirage. I shone the light in and saw the cab seats, empty except for the driver's logbook resting open on the dash. I opened the door. It wasn't locked. The hinges groaned like something waking up after a long sleep. Inside, the air was cool, too cool for the desert. The logbook was open to a new page. Fresh ink still glistening. The handwriting was the same. The entry read, Inspection complete. Second retrieval inbound. ETA 10/12/2025 authorized by Harris. My stomach turned to ice. Deputy Harris had died 2 years ago. The air outside changed as I stepped back. The wind picked up for the first time all day, carrying a low hum that didn't sound like wind at all. More like distant idling, an engine buried under the earth. I shone the light toward the horizon and saw a line of faint glows flickering in the dark, like headlights moving slowly in formation. I backed toward my car, but the engine had cut off on its own. The headlights flicked twice as if signaling. Then the hum grew louder, vibrating through the ground until I realized it wasn't coming from any direction. It was coming from below. I ran back to the cab and grabbed the logbook, flipping through the pages. Every line now ended with the same sentence repeated over and over, the ink still wet. Do not stop! I dropped it and bolted for the car. The headlights in the distance blinked out, one by one, until only the desert moon lit the ground. When my engine finally turned over, I didn't look back. I drove straight to the nearest station in Marathon, hands trembling, mouth dry as sand. I told the clerk what I'd seen. He just stared at me, then pointed to a corkboard behind the counter. There, among old flyers and lost dog posters, was a faded photograph of a smiling man beside a white Peterbilt. The caption read, Missing since 2001, last seen near Van Horn. The name below it was Deputy Alan Harris. They say now that no one drives that stretch after dark. Some truckers swear they see lights pacing them along the fence line, always keeping speed, always silent. Others hear the low rumble of an engine with no source, like something breathing beneath the asphalt. The DOT shut down the investigation years ago, but I know what I saw. That truck out there isn't rusting. It's waiting. And sometimes, late at night when I'm driving west, I tune through the static on the radio. And for a moment I hear a voice reading coordinates in that same hollow tone. Then just before it cuts out, there's the faint scratch of pen on paper, the sound of another entry being written in a logbook meant for a delivery that hasn't happened yet. I was in the habit then of driving back roads after midnight, when the heat softened and the deer risked the shoulders like ghosts testing the world. The company sent me to look at projects no one wanted to sign for, the stubborn ones that chewed through budgets and swallowed contractors whole. We were told to call it quality assurance. The crews called me the man with the clipboard. What I really was most nights was a moving pair of headlights in the dark, with a thermos of coffee, and the window cracked to smell whatever the countryside still had left to say. You learn a place that way. Mesquite smoke where someone shouldn't be burning. Creosote from railroad ties, the sweet green breath that comes up out of creek bottoms after a storm. I started doing it when my wife left, the quiet drives, telling myself it was about work. It was about not hearing the house. I came to the bypass outside Madden on one of those nights. Madden sits past the edge of any tourist map, west of Mason, north of Sonora, wherever the lines of the hill country give up and the sun burns the grass down to wire. The council had pushed for a bypass to keep gravel haulers out of downtown. FEM 615 ran right through the square and the square was sinking. They drew an arc through rangeland and goat country, surveyed it, bored their soil samples, found what they thought they would find. Caliche and shattered limestone, stubborn but honest. They cut a swath around town, graded the subgrade until it looked like a scar a giant had scratched into the pastures, then started building the road the way you build any other, base lifts tack coat surface. The part you can write down, the part that behaves. The work ran clean until July when the asphalt began to bleed. One of the foremen called it bleeding. Another said weeping. The superintendent, a man with a neck as thick as a post driver, wouldn't say a word about it until I was on the ground and smiling so he could pretend it wasn't fear. They showed me on the east end where the bypass would cross Old Ranch Road 8. A long patch had gone from matte black to glassy in the heat, not unusual for a thin lift. It was what bubbled through that made the men step back. It wasn't oil. I crouched beside it with my gloved hand and the smell turned me away before I touched it. Not bitumen, not diesel. It was a mineral odor and something sweet, almost like the smell in a feed store where a sack of corn got wet and soured. When I leaned closer, I saw pale ribbons suspended under the surface like roots. A kid with a shovel broke the skin of the slick. The stuff lifted and clung as if it knew the air would turn it. A glob broke loose and slumped onto the panel truck's tire. It left a smear the color of brewed tea with milk. When the glob split, it broke along lines like growth rings, as if it had been growing under there, patient, and we had cut into it. The superintendent looked away. He had a daughter the same age as the kid with the shovel. The crew left their rollers idling and stood in the shade of the water truck. No one said what the stuff looked like. We all try to keep things polite for as long as we can. I took a sample because that is what my job said to do. I scooped a jelly of it into a glass jar and twisted the lid and wiped the threads with a rag soaked in kerosene. There is a catalog of smells that you carry after years in the field. Diesel on your clothes, burnt rubber from a compressor belt that slipped, the sour of your own sweat when you spend a day in a vest under sun that white. This new smell found a place among them that I didn't like. It filled the cab of my truck and sat in the throats of the two men I took statements from, and it didn't go away when we washed our hands. We finished the paperwork and I told the superintendent to suspend operations until I heard back from the lab. He didn't argue. The kid with the shovel asked if he should keep the tool. I told him to toss it. He nodded like I had told him something else. The lab called and made guesses that sounded good over a phone line. Organic material, leachate, some bloom from a buried pocket of clay. They told me to bring more back. The second night I went alone. It isn't brave to go alone. It is often easier. You don't have to stand in the space between what other people say and what they are thinking. The bypass was a black sea limb in moonlight, a road that wanted to be whole and hadn't learned yet what a finished road is for. I parked past the dozer cut and walked with a flashlight. Coyotes tripped their high remarks from the draws beyond the fence. Grasshoppers rattled in the ditch. It was one of those nights when the wind stops and the world leans in. The place where the asphalt had wept was worse. The patch had spread like wet ink. In the beam of my flashlight, the surface burped and opened. Something fluttered up through, glossy and pale, and lay on the top like a tongue. The sweet feed store smell had changed. There was a sharp note now, like coins, and something that made my teeth ache, a low metal ache from your jaw to your ear. I flicked the light away and back and realized I could see a ripple moving under the binder, traveling ahead of me along the lift, as if it was following the grade. I told myself that heat moves like that, a thermal front in a closed surface. I told myself that there was methane down there or some old seep. I told myself too many things too quickly, and then the flashlight went out. There's a beat your mind takes when the dark convinces it you have been blind all your life. I stood very still and kept my feet on what I knew was the crown of the lift. The moon came back into its own after a few breaths and the road reappeared as a softer black. I put the flashlight in my pocket and let my eyes catch up. The ripple continued. It slowed near my boots. The surface lifted a little. The hot smell unrolled a yard at a time toward me, and with it a whisper I had at first mistaken for the cicadas. My name, quiet, trying the syllables like a child tastes a word. I stepped back and found gravel. I stepped again and found grass. It followed me to the edge like water finds the shape that contains it and then stopped, held by the line of the road as cleanly as if it had been poured into a mold. I slept in the cab for an hour with the windows up and woke to sweat and a head full of iron. I drove into Madden at dawn and poured coffee into the old man at the sheriff's office. He listened the way men who work the night listen, with his eyes on the window and his body still as a stapled page. He told me a story about the peach farmer who found a tractor sunk to its axles in the sandy bend of Joyner Creek, and the way it bled pale mud for 2 days. He told me about the time the windmill on Hester's place spun hard for 3 hours, while every leaf on every tree in town hung limp. He told me the county had a way of moving under you when it wanted, that the limestone listened and answered. When he saw I was disappointed, he said he would ask around about old wells. We found 3 wells on the survey map, stone-lined, pounded with cedar posts and set with rope and pulley in the days before the war. The surveyor's note in the margin was tidy, filled and abandoned 1941. Only one sat under the new bypass. We drove out in the afternoon and found the well in the cut bank of the borrow ditch, a circle of mortared rock like a mouth that had been bricked over. The fill had slumped, leaving a depression the size of a washtub. I pried a chunk of mortar loose with a crowbar and the smell changed again. It came out slow, like a room that had stayed shut too long, the stale breath of a cellar where something had ripened past the point of fruit. The sheriff made a face and moved away. I put my ear to the hole without quite knowing I would and heard a sound like water does under ice, a muffled, patient working, as if something below us wasn't content to stay a past tense. The superintendent refused to bring his people back until someone on a letterhead said it was safe. The county commissioners had their meeting and spent their money on extending the barricades. The weather sent heat until you could take a knife to it. The bypass lay quiet, a question drawn in black. I slept less and drove more. The lab sent an email with a list of compounds I printed and set on the dash. Fats, proteins, polysaccharides, long words that meant what I had smelt. Organic, they wrote again. That did not comfort me. There are things out here older than our names that are organic. The first thing the road took was a dog, a stray that had learned the shape of men in the way the hand opens on a sandwich. He came out of the brush near where the bypass would join 377 and trotted along the shoulder, ears up, tail working like a pump handle. I watched him reach the bleeding patch and stop and sniff. He put a paw on it. The surface yielded like a drumhead. He set more weight and the stuff bulged around his pads. When he tried to pull free, it took his foot back. He paused in that dog way when they decide whether something is a game or not. He tried again. The skin held. He looked at me and whined, a polite, questioning sound as if he knew I was the man with decisions. He tugged and the stuff let him up. It made a thick rope between his paw and the road, and then the rope thinned and snapped and curled and lay back down like a living thing going to sleep. He limped away, offended. I followed the prints he left on the caliche, and at the 4th step, the nails of his paw prints had drawn dark crescents where the rope had licked back. The smell was stronger. I told myself I would stop the bleeding patch with sand. I told myself I was in charge. At night, I brought a trailer of clean sand and a screen and a rake. I shoveled until my back opened and closed like a hinge. I made a beach over the slick, a pale band that looked wrong between the black lift and the brown ditch. The smell moved down into the sand and stayed there like a thought you can't shake. I drove into town and bought bleach from the dollar store. I poured the bleach over the sand and waited with a rag over my face. half expecting a peel of smoke like you get when you pour it onto some stubborn mold. It didn't smoke. The smell dimmed and a new smell shouldered forward, clean and chemical and self-important. For an hour, I believed. The moon came up and the sand shivered and settled. I went to the hood of my truck and wrote notes I would make official. While I wrote, the bleach smell slid away and the sweet metallic came back. The sand had gone dark where it was deepest, and those pale ribbons I had noticed on the first day rose, up to meet the moon. A rancher from up Old Ranch Road 8 pulled alongside and let his engine idle with the lights off. He sat like that a minute, hat low, then said he wished the county had chosen another man for the inspection. He said it in a way that sounded kind at first. Then he told me what his grandfather had told him. There had been a town here before Madden, one that was smaller, a place with a store that sold nails and flour and a church where they held dances even when the preacher disapproved. By the time the railroad chose another route and the army took young men for the war, the town was already colting. People left. What remained were wells and a school foundation, and the cemetery behind a line of live oaks that a stump fire took in a week so hot that the rocks exploded. The county kept records back then with ink and pride. He had looked at them once and found the line you don't read out loud. Disinterment. He said that word without moving his mouth. He said they lifted the stones and took what was easy to take. But the land keeps things when it wants them. That the ground mortar's what you leave into something that will get under your nails. He put the truck in gear and drove away without headlights. I watched his taillights blink on and off far down the fence line like a code I could have learned if I had wanted to badly enough. I called Austin and left messages on machines that promised help after the holiday. I spoke to a man at the Environmental Quality Office who told me to consider that the locals like to gather scare stories around construction like cats around a milk pan. He used that phrase and chuckled. I said nothing about the dog or the whisper that found my name under the skin of the road. I took my jar sample to the motel room and set it on the air conditioner and slept all afternoon like a man who has been pulled under and let go. When I woke, the jar looked as if someone had rolled it between palms while I was asleep. The jelly had shifted and drawn thin filaments up the glass, a cobweb of less than a web. I twisted the lid and smelled the same wrong sweetness and, under it, a clean human smell that made my scalp prickle. A barber shop. Cheap soap. Hair. I thought then of how asphalt is made, of aggregate and binder mixed at a plant and trucked hot, of loads accepted and loads rejected, of stockpiles that sit and drink rain, of quarries where the rock is older than rain. I visited the quarry at noon. Men there with dust ground into their ears told me what they always tell me. The rock came up clean and hard. Strata of limestone like pages too thick for the book. Fossils you could put your finger in and feel press time. No one there had seen anything that matched what I held in my jar. They shook their heads for my benefit and then turned away to hide their interest. Because the county is always listening to itself and gossip is a kind of prayer. On the fourth night, I went back out with a plan I knew was foolish. Concrete lids in the truck bed, 3 bags of mix, a post hole digger, a friend from a crew in Junction who happened to owe me a favor. I didn't tell him what we were sealing. It felt better that way. When we arrived, the bleeding had spread across the entire eastbound lane and down the transition and into the soil where the shoulder would be. The pale ribbons lifted and lay back like fish in the shallows. My friend stood silent and set his jaw. He took one of the lids on his shoulder as if it weighed as little as a promise. We set the first lid over the depression where the well had slumped. We mixed under the stars, the creak sound of shovel against water, and poured a collar around the edge. We set another lid and then another, building a stack like a plug. While we worked, the whisper rose in the road and turned from my name to something else. A busy murmuring, too many voices speaking at once from different rooms. My friend began to answer someone I couldn't hear, mumbling yes and no, and that wasn't me and I didn't take it and you know I didn't. I stopped him with a hand on his shoulder. His eyes looked like a dog that won't come when you call because it has found something better. By morning, the concrete had set, but the stack sat lower than we had left it. It had been drawn down as if the ground wanted it closer. The whisper had quieted, but in its place the road made a sound like a throat clearing. I stood in the ditch and looked at the width still to pave. 1.5 miles of graded earth waiting for something to bind. The thought came then the way thunder answers lightning after a count and takes you by surprise anyway. A road is a promise. We pretend it is about movement, about getting around what stands in our way. But the ground does not see it that way. You put weight in one place and the land remembers. You draw a line and the land keeps it. When you aim a road around a town that held its dead where you now pour your mix, you are not building a way around. You are drawing a circle around a name you do not want to say. I left the lids and drove to the west end where the bypass touched pasture. The barricade stood with reflective faces like blind men waiting for a bus that isn't coming. A creek crossed under in a culvert the crew had poured before they stopped. Water black and lazy. In the shade of the culvert, the smell was at its worst. Not strong, only concentrated, like a secret that has been told too many times. Something had stenciled the underside of the top slab with muddy handprints. I counted without wanting to, and stopped at 14 when the counting felt like a prayer that would obligate me. The hands were too small in some places, too large in others, all the sizes that a town used to have. I stood there with my clipboard like a piece of stage business. I signed what I could sign. I wrote down what I would omit. I told myself I would leave after lunch. The dog came back from somewhere with dried mud caked between his toes and sat on my foot so that I had to choose whether to move. I didn't. I breathed. The road hummed. In the hum was a pattern, and in the pattern a count, and in that count a breaking. I understood then the thing I had been refusing. The road had no use for asphalt anymore. The binders and the lifts and the inspectors were a courtesy to us. The road had found another material, something that remembers better. The shape of a town that went away. The weight of every name it had once carried. The residue of what we lay in the ground when we think we are finished with it. The commissioners hired a firm from San Angelo to come dig out the contaminated base. They arrived with flags and white hard hats and optimism. They cut core samples and posed by the wands of the GPR, and the man in charge told the editor of the weekly paper that everything that bleeds can be stanched. Their backhoe started at the east end and made progress across 50 feet, before it made a noise like a tooth pulled without Novocaine and died. Not stalled, dead. The operator climbed out with a hand over his ear and vomited in the ditch. His supervisor did not print that last part. They left their equipment in the sun and were gone by morning. The dog curled under the shadow of the blade and would not move until dark. I slept in my truck that night one more time. It was not my job anymore. It had become something else. I dreamed of the square in Madden in the days when boys brought girls to dances and the street was dust, and the preacher's voice came through the clapboard like bees trying to get out. I dreamed of the store and the nails and the sugar in sacks that tightened when it rained. I dreamed of the church bell coming down and the stump fire that ran hotter than any story had warned. I dreamed that men lifted what the families could not and carried it to the line of live oaks the fire would take, that they meant kindness and saved only what stone would give up easily. I woke with soil under my tongue. The sun was a white coin in a white bowl. The last thing I wrote in my official capacity was a note that the project would be abandoned. I sent it to Austin with the jar and the list of compounds and the photographs of lids that had sunk. I didn't wait for their answer. I unhooked the barricade at the west end and drove onto the unfinished road, slow without the lights. The hum came up through the tires like a beehive does when you lift the lid and wonder for a heartbeat, if they have agreed to let you do it. The dog stood in the mirror and then was a shape in the dust and then was nothing. I rolled down the window. The air had the smell I knew now, the wrong sweetness with the penny sharp under it, but it also had something like rain in it, although there were no clouds and no wind. The hum rose. The lanes that did not exist were in my hands. I steered in a circle around the town I could not see. The missing turned toward me as if you can turn toward a sound that holds your name inside it. People in Madden will tell you that the bypass failed because of a bad base or a misunderstanding with the quarry. They will say there is a legal fight in Austin, and that once the lawyers finish their business, the road will be built with concrete and the whole problem will go away under the weight. They say this because life demands that you talk about some things in one voice and put the other voice aside, if you want to get groceries without shaking. I moved away. I changed jobs. I sold the truck. The smell stayed as long as it wanted to, and then it went somewhere I could not follow. I buy coffee at a different gas station now and listen to different coyotes. Every August, someone posts a photograph online of an aerial map where a faint path shows through scrub like a bruise under the skin. People argue about what it is. Old cattle trail. Fire break. Artifact of the satellite. The comments go how comments go, and the photograph gets buried under jokes, sometimes late, when everyone else's evening has ended and mine has begun. I open those threads and zoom in until the pixels break apart, and the world becomes the square it lives in. If I'm unlucky, I hear the hum through the fan where I sit. If I am very unlucky, I hear the whisper under it, patient and assured, naming the people who used to be in the space where we thought we could pour a road and erase them. On the worst nights, the hum steadies and the whisper thins, and the sound that remains is one I should have recognized from the start. A single long chord like a paint strip drawn on black, the kind of sound a mother makes when she does not want to cry in front of a child. It goes on until I answer it, and then the house is quiet. Last month I drove back because there are kinds of quiet that empty you out. I parked by the barricade where the county had set new reflectors with cheerful orange hats and stared over the pasture where the road would have bent into the horizon. In the heat shimmer, the dark band came up as if it had never left. I could see the sand where I had poured it, and the place where the lids had been drawn down, and the low, glossy sheen that followed the grade as neatly as any engineer's stake. A vulture traced a circle over the line and stayed with it as if it was on rails. I walked to the edge. The smell met me. It has my name in it now, the way your shirt does when you haven't yet washed it, since the person you loved wore it last. I left my clipboard on the hood of the truck and laid my hand on the skin of the road. It was warm, and then it was warmer, and then it was not a surface at all but an invitation, a memory that was not mine, but had made room for me anyway. I do not know exactly what lies under Madden, under the pasture, under the lifts we pour, whether the thing speaks with the tongues of the dead that were left when the men ran out of time, or if the land speaks with all of its ages at once and we call it the dead because it is easier. I know that a road is a promise, and promises kept too long turn into demands. I know that some places are not finished and will not let you finish them. The commissioners will put it back on the agenda one day. There will be bids and speeches and project charts packed with optimism. Someone new will drive at night and smell what the world keeps under its first story. He will bring a jar. He will be told the words we all use: organic, leachate, local superstition. He will nod and sleep in his truck. The whisper will find him because it is patient and knows how to pronounce our names. If he is lucky, he will understand that the thing asks for nothing impossible. It wants to be remembered, not with stones or careful rectangles of grass, but with the weight of a road that admits what it runs over. If he is not lucky, he will decide to finish what I left unfinished. He will fill the last gap and draw the circle closed. He will hear the hum slow, and the town will go quiet in a way that matters. And the new bypass will carry gravel trucks and tourists who marvel at how easily they got around. He will drive home to a house that does not speak. He will not smell anything at all. He will think that is a kind of peace. I keep the jar with the filaments in a cabinet I don't open often. The glass is smudged with the oils of my hands. The jelly has gone the color of old bandage and settled into a shape that resembles something that isn't a thing. When a storm comes through and the first drops hit the window, the stuff lifts as if remembering how. On those nights I sit with my back to the door and try not to sleep. I touch my palm to the scar of a burn on my thigh, where some splash got me through jeans and left a mark shaped like a thumb I don't recognize. When I dream, the road curves through the dark and there are no cones and no drums and no men waiting to wave me along. There is only that finished promise stretching into a horizon I can't reach, shining slightly despite the stars, the kind of black that has depth to it. In the dream, I press the accelerator and let the hum flood the cab until all I am is a name inside it, and the line I follow is not painted and never will be. It is already there under everything, waiting to rise. I had been walking west for 3 days when the wind began to lift the sand in sheets, and the sun turned the color of a dime. The road was a cracked ribbon running toward a low blue line of mountains that never seemed to get closer. A frontage strip staggered beside I-10 where trucks muscled past like moving buildings. Each time one roared by, the grit came up and got in my teeth and under my eyelids. There were yucca spears and flat-horned pads of prickly pear. Coyote prints stitched through the bar ditch like a seam. Somewhere ahead was El Paso. The word felt cool in my mouth, water after a long, dry spell. It promised a bus station with a hard plastic seat and a ticket counter, a place where I could sit with a coffee until someone else's sky took me in. Until then, there was road and light and a wind that came on stronger with every mile. My name is Eli. It's not much of a name, but it belongs to me. It's stitched inside my right boot where I wrote it with a ballpoint pen the day I bought them. Back when I still had a truck and a glove box and the idea that I was going somewhere on 4 tires instead of 2 feet. The right heel is worn to a slant because I drag that foot when I'm tired. I know the nails in these soles like old injuries. There's one I hammered flat with a rock outside Fort Stockton because it was working its way through the insole and biting the meat of my foot. I know the print those boots leave. I know it like a signature. That's how I knew what I was looking at when the wind boiled up a veil of sand and let it drop. And I saw a trail of boot prints ahead of me in the dust on the shoulder, heading east. They were mine. Same slant to the right heel. Same little nick where the hole punch on the arch had torn a crescent. The stride was my stride. Long when I was trying to eat miles and take a town in one gulp. Short when the sun pinned me down and I counted fence posts. The prints came out of the west as if I had already passed myself and never noticed. If I had been a man with a tidy mind, I would have said a ranch hand with the same model of boot had gone this way last night and I was spooking myself. If I had been the kind of man who took a photograph of odd things, I would have snapped one and filed it under strange, then kept walking. But I had been alone too long and my thoughts had turned tender at the edges. The road will do that. It puts a wobble in your sense of what's straight. I stopped and turned a slow circle, shielded my eyes, and that was when I heard it for the first time. Faint as the brush of a moth's wing. Eli. I have been called across parking lots and through half-open apartment doors and once by a judge and a voice that said, "I knew you'd be back." This was none of those. The wind carried it, I thought. Wind loves tricks. It finds broken glass and makes a choir out of it. It gets inside stop signs and they hum, but this felt like the inside of my name. Like the sound had started in my mouth and then pushed out and come around and climbed back into my ear. I cupped my hands around my face and listened, and all I got was the scratch of grit on my teeth. I told myself to keep moving. The sky had a pale, sick look. Storm coming! When the desert coughs like that, you find a ditch or a culvert, and you make yourself small and you wait. But I had never liked waiting. I had been a child who pulled at the oven door to see if the cake had risen. A teenager who pushed the gas because the straightaway begged for it. That's how you end up on foot in a place like this, with your name on a little cloud of dust that says it knows you better than you know yourself. At noon, the sun became a bright dime lost in a pocket of dirty cloth, and the wind raised a grit you could have folded. It came in curtains and then in ropes that whipped across the road. I pulled my shirt up over my mouth and bent into it. My eyes watered, and behind the water I saw those prints keeping a ruler's distance from my toes. I tried to stamp one out to erase it, as if a thing could be unmade by the pressure of a heel. But when I took my foot back, the print I had stepped on wasn't altered. My tread lay neatly inside my tread like an old word tracing a new one. I felt a little cold enter the space between my shoulders that had nothing to do with weather. And then the wind said my name again. Eli. There isn't much out there between Van Horn and El Paso that isn't military or sky. A tethered aerostat rides the horizon some days like a pale moon on a string. There are border patrol trucks and the occasional state trooper sitting quiet at the median cut, waiting for a sinner. There are whistles where the culverts breathe. I found one of those culverts and slid down into it when the sand started to come thick. You can taste creosote when it rains here, and you can taste it when it storms too. A green, medicinal sweetness under the dirt. I sat with my back against the concrete and watched the day go beige and then practically white. There was writing on the culvert. Names and dates in Sharpie and a drawing of a longhorn with its tongue out. I put my fingers on the names and felt the grooves someone had cut with a knife. There was a receipt rock in the corner, one of those smooth stones people leave notes under for the next to come. I lifted it and there was a folded square of paper stiff with dust. When I opened it, the paper cracked at the fold. A pencil had written only 2 words, "Keep left." It looked like my handwriting. It was my handwriting. People are always surprised by their own script in a mirror, as if there is a stranger inside them that does the writing. Seeing mine here under a rock I had never lifted and a culvert I had never sat in until now, made the cold between my shoulders grow teeth. I put the paper back under the rock. I did not want to carry it and be its messenger and make whatever it meant into law. The storm passed the way they do, sudden as a shout, and the light returned full of needles. I climbed out and wiped my eyes with the heel of my hand. Sand has a way of grinding you down until what's inside your head starts to sound like gravel. I stood on the shoulder and the world clicked 1 notch to the right, and there those prints were again. Clean, as if a man had set each foot down while I was below the road. To my left was the interstate. To my right, a fence line and a sea of brush. Ahead, a green sign said Sierra Blanca 14. There was a gas station icon on the next one if you believed in signs. I tried to be the kind of man who did. I was feeling raw enough to need proof that the future had a cash register in it. and a cold bottle inside a door that chimed when you opened it. I followed the prints and the sign, and the day turned into a long rubber band you can pull but never break. When I finally saw the gas station, it sat in the heat like a low white boat run aground. 2 pumps out front and a cooler with cloudy glass and a sign for burritos you could microwave inside. There was a red Coke bench. There was a dog under it, one ear up. The dog watched me the way dogs do who already know about you. When I pushed the door, the bell on a string hit the frame with the polite sound of a spoon. The clerk looked like he'd been poured into place. His hair had a winter's worth of grease. His eyes were half a click away. The little plastic sign on his chest said Marty. I took a bottle of water from the cooler and paid for it. And when he took my crumpled bills, he looked at me in a way that said he had finished a puzzle. You again, he said. Me what? You were just here. You got the green Gatorade and the jerky, and you asked if there was a back road to El Paso that didn't run into border. I told you the frontage is your friend. You left 10 minutes ago. I've been walking in from the east all morning, I said. I saw no one. You were here, he said. He didn't say it mean. He said it like a man reads the temperature and knows it for what it is. He reached under the counter and put a receipt down and tapped it. I kept this because you said keep it. I looked at the receipt and the world did its little click again. The timestamp was 10 minutes before I had walked in. The items a green Gatorade and a bag of peppered jerky. Underneath, in the white space where the register had not printed, there was a note in pencil. It was 3 words this time, and they were mine. Do not turn. Do not turn when? I asked, and the clerk put both hands on the counter like he was pushing away from a table where something had died. You want to sit for a bit, he said. Storm's not done. And as if his word had weight, the wind started its old song again. The dog under the bench made the sound dogs make when they know thunder is a mouth opening. I took the receipt and put it in my pocket and sat on a plastic chair under the window while the sand made a veil. And I thought about the ways a man can intersect with himself and not come apart. There are dreams where you meet your child self on a staircase, and his face has your mouth but a different set to it. There are moments early in love or late in grief when you feel so doubled you might be a sheet hung wet on a line, 2 sides of the same cloth with air between. But boots are not ideas. Prints are not metaphors. I took the receipt out again and turned it over. On the back at the bottom, faint, there was a 4th word, as if my pencil had been tired. Yet, when the wind dropped enough to see, I went back out. The dog had moved to the shade as if it had been told. The prints were there on the shoulder, heading east. I faced west, and the road looked like a story that had learned its first sentence by heart, and now refused to learn the second. I thought about the note under the rock and the receipt and what the clerk had said about me being here and gone. The thing you don't admit to yourself until you must is that you have been running in a loop for a long time. The loop can be a marriage, a habit, a lie, a town. Mine had been a long time coming, and it had a truck in it with a cracked windshield and a cooler with 4 beer cans, and a night where the blue lights turned the roadside brush into the color of a cheap church window. It had a thing I said into a phone to a brother I was not speaking to in the silence that answered. When a man starts losing nouns, he begins to carry only verbs, and those verbs get thin. Walk, drink, forget. Keep left. I kept left because the note said to. I kept to the shoulder that faced the bar ditch and not the interstate. I kept left at a fork where a caliche road split off and dived behind the tank batteries. I kept left when a fence line made a suggestion that there was something worth seeing to the right, a windmill turning and a cattle tank with a circle of greener grass around it. I kept left, and then the prints that were mine angled right. They angled off the shoulder into the crumbly place where water had once rushed and made a little arroyo, and down in that wash the prints doubled and confused themselves like someone had paced there. I stood on the lip and shaded my eyes, and that was when the wind used my name again, and this time it had dirt in it. Eli. There was a culvert further along where the arroyo went under the frontage. The prints went that way, and so did I. The air inside the concrete pipe was like a throat, warmer by a degree with the news that someone had been here not long before. The dust inside was filmed with narrow drags as if something had been pulled through. At the far end, on the exit lip, there was another stone, and under it another paper. This one didn't fold. It was a candy wrapper with the slick gone and the paper showing. The pencil had cut it. 4 notches sharply made like a prisoner was counting days. Beside the notches was the time 2:17 and then another set of notches. I put it in my pocket because my hands were shaking. I crawled out and the light hurt my new eyes. The interstate sounded like a sea. When I looked up, I saw a white SUV on the access road with a green stripe angled across its door. A border patrol agent got out, hat tipped forward, hand on his belt. "You doing all right?" he asked. "I'm headed to El Paso," I said, which was true enough to pass. "A lot of folks headed a lot of places," he said. He glanced at my boots, then at the shoulder behind me, and I could feel him clock the prints like a mechanic hears a knock under the hood. "Saw you a few miles back," he said. "You stop at the station with the dog?" "Yes." "Then you turned around," he said. "I didn't." He looked at me for a longer second. His eyes were not unkind. He had the face of a man who had seen too many versions of the same story to be surprised by any one of them. "Storms out here will put a man inside his own head and bolt the door," he said. "Happens to hunters, hikers, drifters. Keep to the left of the road. If you start to hear things that ain't wind, you get low and wait it out." He touched his hat and got back in his truck, and when he pulled away, the tires made that sound tires make in loose grit, like the road is applauding. I kept to the left. When the shoulder ran out at a bridge, I hugged the barrier and I kept left. The prints that were mine kept doing what they were doing, which was to insist that I had been where I had not. Near dusk, I came to a rest area that had been closed for repairs. There was a chain through the gate and a sign with naive stick figures on it to explain why it was closed. Like language had failed and pictures would do. Inside the fence was a picnic shelter and the metal ribs of a shade structure. An emergency call box stood like a skinny sentry on a concrete pad, the kind with a blue light that would spin when someone was in trouble. The blue light was dead in its bowl. I stood with my fingers through the fence and looked at the box and thought of all the voices that had gone up through it like smoke. There was mud on the pad from some old rain. In that mud, preserved like glass, was a pair of boot prints. They were mine. The toes pointed toward the box as if I had gone there and put my hand on the button and waited for a voice that would know me. The gate's chain was old, and the lock gave to a twist of the chain itself. I went inside without thinking about how it might look. I walked to the box and put my palm on the little metal circle. The metal was warmer than the air. The speaker above it smelled like old wires. When the wind slid under the shade and got inside the box, it made a low hum like a held note. I pressed the button and waited. The hum deepened, and then I heard the kind of voice you hear when you dream of a phone ringing, as if the distance between 2 points had become a mouth. It said my name, and it did not ask if I needed help. It said my name the way a mother might say it when she sees a child stepping into the street. Eli. The blue light did not spin. The call did not connect to any place that could be found on a map. The sound filled the space behind my ribs and then emptied it, and when it stopped, the silence made a crack in me. I took my hand off the button. On the metal was a faint circle of moisture from my palm. Inside it, there was a print I could not have made, smaller than the pad of my hand but clear, like someone had put their hand there too from inside the metal and marked it. I stepped back and nearly put my boot in the older print in the mud and caught myself like a man, pulling his hand away from a stove. I went back to the fence and rehooked the chain like I had found it and went to the shoulder. The light leaked out of the day, and the mountains that had been at the edge of everything eased a little closer like a promise kept late. A mile on, the prints turned off the shoulder and into the brush. There was a gap in the fence with a couple of wounded strands of barbed wire pushed down. Beyond, the land jumped down a foot into an old roadbed. The prints went that way and I went that way too because I was done pretending I hadn't come for this. The old road ran along the backs of mesquite and greasewood and wore a shawl of grass. I walked until the hum of the interstate had softened, and the road became a memory of a road, and the prints multiplied again in a nervous knot beside a dry wash. There, under a ragged mesquite whose trunk had grown around someone's forgotten chain, was a shallow depression ringed with stones blackened by fire. There was a can in the ashes, the paper cooked off it, and beside the fire pit a small mound. At the top of the mound, a plastic card had worked itself half out of the dirt like a mouth. I reached down and pulled it free and wiped it on my jeans. It was a Texas driver's license, swollen with moisture and then dried again so the laminate had bubbled. The photo smiled a little with its mouth and not its eyes. The name on it was mine. The corners had been rounded by pocket wear. The expiration had come and gone. I stood there with my heart making a kind of rough music, and I said out loud that this was a trick. People lose wallets. People pick up what others drop. The license could have come loose from the pocket of a pair of jeans I had left in a laundry somewhere. Someone could have found it and carried it and tossed it, and the desert could have done its sorting. All those things were true and none of them mattered. The thing that mattered was that my prince had led me here, and now my hand was full of my name on a little rectangle the color of a bad evening. I turned and the wind picked up a handful of dust and threw it at me like a joke. The mountains leaned in another inch. Somewhere a dog barked at a sound only it could hear. In the low wash, the dust made a shallow river that ran both ways at once. I looked down at my boots and saw that the right heel had eaten itself a little more, that the nick in the arch had grown teeth. I looked at the mound and thought about the notches on the candy wrapper and the time 2:17. A moment carved into a day to mark when something stops being itself. I do not know what it was that made me do what I did next, except to say that when a loop shows you its seam, you put your finger there. I took the license and put it back where I had found it, and pressed the dirt down gently like a man tucking in a child. I stepped backward carefully so my prince would not tread on my prince, and then I turned around in the gray light and followed the line of the other me east toward the way I had come. The storm was building itself again out there, gathering its skirts. I took the receipt from my pocket and smoothed it and added one word with a stub of pencil I carry for luck. A word to the 3 already written in my hand by whatever it is in me that writes notes. Now. By the time I reached the fence gap, the wind had a voice back in it. It carried things you could believe in if you wanted. I believed enough to hear my name when it came the next time. It was louder and nearer and patient. Eli. A man can walk into a city from any direction and come out changed or not at all. He can take the road that goes there or the road that loops him back until he understands what he keeps skipping, what he keeps turning away from at the last minute when the exit comes up and the sign says a place he swears he will see someday. The isolated roads will hold your feet like open hands and they will offer you an exchange. I took it. I kept left until the prince reached the gas station, and the dog's ear went up again and the clerk lifted his head like he was hearing a song he hadn't heard since he was young. I opened the door and the bell touched the frame. I bought a green Gatorade and jerky and told Marty I was headed west and did he know a back way that missed the checkpoints. And he told me the frontage is your friend. And he handed me the receipt when I asked him to, and I took my pencil and wrote down the words I would need soon enough. Do not turn. Outside, the sky had pulled its dime out of the pocket and was getting ready to hide it again. I put the receipt in my pocket and went to the shoulder. And in the dust there were the prints of a man going the other way. He was me and he wasn't. He had my boots and a right heel that needed mending and a way of not learning that had cost him. I let the wind have my name. I let the road hum its long song under the feet of trucks. I let the mountains hold still as the day slid down them. And I walked into the place where the voice in the dust would decide if it was mine or not. And the prints behind me filled with wind and then flattened as if they had been wiped clean by a careful hand.